Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto has strongest wand in Hogwarts. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Foy the Snooze Button, link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. Naruto was always marveled by his uncle's tattoos. They were intricately drawn, spread out on his back and his chest but leaving the sternum and between the shoulder blades bare of permanent black ink art. A dark brown phantom wielding two pale blue wind-trenched knives with burning red swallows spinning around his back to his arms and wrists carrying along heavy-looking black chains. The complicated piece of permanent skin art looked both harmonious and chaotic at the same time. He liked those tattoos very much. They represented all the things he wanted to say and all the things he was thinking almost all the time but could never find the words to express. He would ask his uncle Asuma what the tattoos meant and the man would always smile, ruffle his hair playfully and tell him it was for work. Was for work. The little child never once prodded or poked his uncle for more than those few words, content to catching Asuma leave the shared bathroom and admiring the tattoos spread out on his back like art on a canvas. One day Naruto asked Asuma, as they were watching a game show with the rest of the family, and Akuma and grandfather Hiruzen, if he could one day get Asuma's kind of tattoos. The exact same kind, albeit with a few small changes here and there, and his uncle grew wide-eyed. And Akuma, Asuma's older twin sister, covered her mouth in horror, then she glared at Asuma. Hiruzen only sighed in regret. You can never know, you should never get these tattoos, Naruto. The man whispered hotly, pointing a stern finger at his 5-year-old nephew. Promise me you will never get these tattoos. He grabbed the boy's shoulder and looked deep into his eyes, pleading. The red-haired boy didn't know what else to do than to nod dumbly, his lips clamped shut and shaking like a leaf in a storm. That night his uncle and aunt argued for the first time since they were teenagers. That night, their wheelchair-ridden grandfather rolled himself to Naruto's room, a large space in the attic that had been given to the child as soon as he turned 4. The complicated, oddly powered machines helped pull the man up the long flight of stairs from the living room to the bedroom attic, and Hiruzen wheeled himself to the great window close to his sleeping grandson's bed. Naruto woke up with a start despite how silent the old man was. Sleep still swam in his eyes and his mind was too muddled to draw a line between real life and dreams, but something still hit the child deep in his soul before he returned back to sleep. He could still remember the old man's words. You're a very gifted boy, Naruto. The words would echo in his mind. The hollow smile the man gave him still sent chills down his spine, like the smile a man who already knew of his death. You're a very special boy. The smile of a dead man to his precious grandson. Hiruzen stayed for a few more minutes, watching the red-haired child snore soundly in his sleep. A very special boy. There was an explosion downstairs that threw Naruto off the bed and into his grandfather. The man pulled out his 8-inch bicorn mane and cedarwood wand and pointed it at the trapdoor bedroom door. He pushed the boy away and ordered for him to hide under his bed. Yellow and red light flashed from the open trap door, and pained screams resonated through the great Sarutobi house. Feet quickly stomped up the stairs and scampered up the ladder. Naruto's eyes enlarged as he saw his uncle Asuma carrying a one-armed Akuma, panting like a race horse. He gently dropped her beside their father, and dove back head first to attack the home invaders, hissing out vengeful curse after vengeful curse. Blindingly angry that the attackers had harmed his sister. Naruto knew a few spells, some minor, beginner-level spells, but the words that Asuma spat out, hateful hexes and curses he never knew existed. Akuma died before Hiruzen could finish knotting up her bleeding arm. Her right kidney and her liver had been burst from a curse. She died choking on her own blood, her glassy eyes staring lifelessly at her cowering nephew. Her gurgled apology tore at the child. He clamped his hands over his mouth and tried to muffle out his mournful cries as tears streamed down his eyes unrelenting. The loud noise under them tapered to a stop. A shadowy, black ball shot up into the room and rolled towards Hiruzen. The warlock effortlessly caught it before it could reach him but gasped as he saw what it was. Asuma's eyeless head. In his horror, the old man was too slow to see the killing curse. The Yakuza took Naruto away and burnt the Sarutobi house down. Kagaya told Naruto, after sifting through his memories with legitimacy, that it was simply a coincidence that her gang had attacked the house of the former great warlock, Hiruzen Sarutobi, on the same night he unconsciously asked when he could join the Yakuza. It was a lie. It was strange how much Kagaya trusted Naruto. She said it was because Naruto reminded her of one of her sons, Hagoromo, just like another child that used to be with Kagaya reminded her of her other son, Hamura. Sasuke died of food poisoning just a month before Kagaya's Yakuza could invade the Sarutobi residence. If he was still alive, he and Naruto would have been the same age. Hagoromo and Hamura were executed after they had attempted to usurp Kagaya from her throne. That was a few years ago. The thing was, the two brothers planned their usurpation all wrong. Kagaya smiled serenely, looking up into the blank purple eyes of her adopted son. Around her broken form were several black and red cloaked bodies, among which were Obito, Madara, Zetsu, Tonari and Danzo. The pale-eyed princess felt tears slither down the corner of her eyes. She blinked hard. For some reason I always knew you would be the one to kill me. The 10-year-old boy remained silent. The woman's 8-inch rosewood with Velacor wand poked down hard on her forehead. Naruto grit his sharp teeth. You're a very special boy. The underworld is now yours, my precious little boy, she said in a raspy voice. She blinked out the proud tears once again and bubbled out. I'm so proud of you. 5 years of living as a Yakuza, the youngest in history. Life was violent. Life was accursed. Life was short. That life was not for a child. He stopped being a child after he saw the life leave his Aunt Akuma's eyes. You failed to learn and you die like a flea-bitten dog, leader's child or not. He was not exempted from the initiation, the raids, the mass beatings, or the killings. You're my special little boy. Avada Kedavra. The boy spat and blasted a shining, toxic green light straight into the woman's forehead. She died instantly. He straightened up and turned around to the remaining Yakuza members that had stormed into the throne room of the leader. His knuckles were bruised and his short sleeves showed the red and black tails that were speckled with blood that wasn't his own. Whispers rippled through their ranks as they saw that it was the leader's son that had killed over 20 high-ranking wizards and witches, most of which were littered around the boy as she stood over his dead mother. The first person to fall onto his knees and swore his allegiance to the new leader of the Yakuza was the purple with black ring-eyed sorcerer, Nagato. The members of the Akatsuki faction of the Yakuza followed suit without hesitation. Then the Konoha 9 and Team 9. The root faction of the Yakuza dropped to their knees and vowed to serve their new leader. Roughly 100 and counting Yakuza members inside and outside the throne room bowed to Naruto and pledged their loyalty to him. It was funny how, when the world was fighting against Voldemort and his Death Eaters since the moment Naruto was born, none of the bloodshed reached magical Japan. Rather, the Yakuza was the one causing havoc and wresting control from the leaders of magical Japan. Voldemort was killed when Naruto was 6, a year into his life as a Yakuza. By that time, the magical gang had cemented their place as the undisputed leaders of Japan, not only magical Japan, with a notoriety that was feared all over the globe. So much so that no Death Eater ever set out to fight them for control over Japan, even though the gang's main focus was on the magical realm of the country. There were formal political organizations that led magical side of the country, a minister of magic, a board of wizards called the Five Kage, several departments in the Ministry of Magic, a great bank situated in Kumo, a solid justice system and plenty of employees that worked to maintain law and order in the country. Deeper down into the inner workings of the magical side of the country, the Yakuza pulled the strings. And Naruto was at the helm. 1 year later. Lord Leader, I still don't understand why you wish to go to Britain, the head of the Akatsuki said in a deep voice to Naruto. They were in the well-lit office of the Yakuza boss. The blood-red-haired boy was sitting behind a desk with his elbows on the table and his fingers laced together, placed under his small nose as he looked at the 8 remaining Akatsuki members, seeing as Obito and Zetsu were long since dead. The Akatsuki were wearing their signature black with red clouds cloak, standing in a row before the desk while Nagato stood forward a little, a way of showing his leadership over the others. The boy wore a well-fitted short-sleeved, black suit shirt with black shorts that reached his knees, red suspenders held them up. He also had on blood-red socks that went up to his mid-shin and red sneakers, the best Muggle-designed shoes in the market. The window of his office had pictures of former bosses hung up on the walls and a massive window stood behind Naruto, showing the stormy rain that poured down in Konoha. The clothes he wore showed the long sleeve of tattoos that wound down from the darkness in his sleeves to his wrists. 2 tails, one red and the other black, twisted around both of his arms, and if he was to take off his shirt it would show 2 foxes curled up together in a fetal position with their 5 other tails, of which the 2 yin-yang styled foxes shared, wound to the front of the boy's torso, though never meeting and leaving the sternum to his navel free of markings. The foxes were painted red and black with a fierce snarl on their powerful maws. Between each intricate tail were licks of blue fire and red water, woven peacefully through his arms and torso. It had taken 4 months to complete the boy's gang tattoo, and that was only because Kagaya had ordered for him not to be given any painkiller during the process of getting the tattoo on. His adopted mother had said that each gang tattoo represented their respective member, Her tattoo was that of a white-winged angel with pale eyes and wielding a scythe made out of bones and blood. Kagaya had said that the foxes tied him to his mother's clan and the red water and blue fire tied him to his father's clan, all of which perfectly synced in his body. The process hurt like hell. He no doubt looked and acted like a true boss, but some of the Akatsuki, and the rest of the gang, found it hard to get past his age. The thing that sobered them up was that the same 11 child that sat before them in the boss's seat had incapacitated several ministry workers, killed 28 high-ranking wizards and the immediate former boss of the gang, of which that was considered to be the goddess of magic. No doubt Naruto was a fast learner, 5 years under Kagaya's direct tutelage and being taught at the side by the current Minister of Magic, Hyuga Hayashi. A prodigy that was seen only once in a lifetime, but it still couldn't explain why a 10-year-old boy could storm into the Ministry of Magic with a training wand he got from Konoha, kill the guards and work his way towards Kagaya, who was meeting with Hayashi in his office. Training wands were underpowered for the reason that the children that used them wouldn't be harmed by uncontrollable or intentional magic, but Naruto had used it cast over 18 killing curses, a Patronus, a silver shield, several banishing spells, numerous body lock hexes, a number of disarming spells and an array of other spells. Admittedly, he made use of his fists a few times, enough to make his knuckles bleed. When the core of his training wand had melted as he faced off against his adopted mother, he rushed to the goddess with blood in his eyes and disarmed her, with a lot of physical and mental effort, and killed the Vila with her own Vila core wand. The only people that knew why he was so gifted was Kagaya and Hayashi, and the former was dead while the latter had been sworn to secrecy by the former. Naruto could give a few guesses on why he was as good as he was with magic, but he didn't really care much about it. His gang respect his strength, that was enough. "Boss, is it that you want us to open a base in Britain?" Conan drawled, her eyes dull and her face stoic. "I received a letter this morning from Albus Dumbledore," Naruto said to the assembled wizards and witch, not really answering the dark mage's question but at the same time answering it with a low twinkle in his large purple eyes. A few more Yakuza trickled into his office, bowing their heads to Naruto, which the leader accepted with a small nod back, and they walked to behind the Akatsuki. When all his high-ranked gang members had all entered, he looked to the person at the back, Omoe, and the dark-skinned boy closed the door, clicking it shut. The boss cleared his throat and said again, for those that had just arrived, "The headmaster of Hogwarts sent me a letter." He looked over them, gauging their reactions. The gang members silently shared looks with each other and looked back at their boss. He formally requested I enroll in his school. Hayden bit down a terrible curse and Kisame spat at the ground in disgust. A corner of Naruto's lips quirked up and he looked at them curiously. "Yes, Kisame Hayden." "The balls on that guy," Kisame muttered angrily. His face contorted into a vicious snarl and he growled. "They want you to enroll in Hogwarts?" "Don't they know who the fuck you are?" Hayden said, his fingers curled and shook. "Do you want us to kill him, boss?" Naruto scoffed and waved for them to calm down. "I doubt he doesn't know who I am, Hayden, and no, let the man live." His purple eyes snapped to the girl standing behind Nagato, the head of the rock wizards and witches of the Yakuza, Kuratsuchi, and he nodded for her to speak. "Assuming you did not know magic, which is untrue," she added when Kisame looked over his shoulder with blood-red eyes. The rest of the Akatsuki did so as well, glaring hatefully at the girl for even saying such a thing, none more so than the heavily offended shark wizard, undead necromancer, the Rinnegan sorcerer, and the paper enchantress. Kuratsuchi coughed and continued. "Does he think we don't have our own school of magic?" There were 2 magical schools in magical Japan, the Suno Academy for magically gifted boys and girls for children ranging from 3 years old, nursery classes, to 11, junior classes, and the Konoha School for aspiring witches and wizards, for children ranging from 11 to 17. Each one dated back so far in history that their origins were somewhat confused. They proudly stood at the same level as Hogwarts, bows, batons, and drumstrung. The very same high-ranking gang members in the room had all passed through at least one of the 2 magical schools. "I'm sure a man of his age knows of our magic schools," Naruto replied, his cool, lazily half-lidded eyes calming the Akatsuki down. "He wrote that my grandfather, Hiruzen Sarutobi, an old friend of Dumbledore, applied to Hogwarts when I was just handed into his care. He wanted me to attend the school." The gang members all knew that their leader had not gone to any formal learning institution to learn magic. All the knowledge the young man had accumulated was passed down to him, orally and in written, by his adopted mother and Hayashi Hyuga. Although a wizard in the country had to have a certificate to get a good government job, a few people did not pass through the education system and turned out fine, like Nara Shikaku, who was the head Auror in the Ministry of Magic. The closest to Hiruzen's age right before he died coughed and looked at Naruto for permission to speak. The boss nodded and Hamura, one of the late Sarutobi's former friends, said, "Knowing Hiruzen, there was a reason he wanted you to go to Hogwarts and not Konoha." I thought so too, and I did a little digging in my grandfather's family history. His only relation, albeit a very distant niece of his, is a woman named Minerva McGonagall. The woman is many years younger than he was, and my grandfather regularly writes to her about me, but I am not sure if she is aware of my current position. I doubt my grandfather would want me to attend the school simply because his niece is there. He has a number of distant relations in Konoha. I wonder, but I also doubt, if it has anything to do with Harry Potter. Naruto assumed, slightly screwing his lips to the side in thought. The baby was currently a year old and his location was a heavily guarded secret, nothing that Naruto couldn't attain, of course. As far as he knew, he was not related to Harry, whether it was through his paternal or maternal side of the family. Regardless, I will be going to Hogwarts. I have already sent back my response. His eyes narrowed and he held up a hand when he saw his subordinates begin to disagree with his resolution. My decision is final. Naruto, sir, Sai called from close to the back, raising his hand to get Naruto's attention. Will you at least allow us to accompany you there, even if it is to serve as your guards? I will decide on that later. For now, I will be going to the bank for my grandfather's will. 6 years had passed and the will was still intact in the Great Kumo Bank. Besides the small loads of cash stashed here and there around the country that belonged to the infamous gang, Naruto had been frequently called by the bank as soon as Kagaya died on the matter of his grandfather's will. He had been postponing the visit for a whole year. And I will also be going to get my wand fitted. Up until that point, the young redhead had been using his adopted mother's rosewood with Velacor wand, mostly because it did not reject him like it did whenever he used it before when he picked it up from the ground, and also that he was too busy with matters concerning his gang to get a new wand. Naruto was not completely comfortable with using the same wand that had killed his uncle and his grandfather, but it was all he had while he was swamped with gang business. Now that the situation had normalized somewhat, giving him some breathing room and time to rest. Kakuzu and Sasori, I want you to contact Gringotts and open a bank account for me. How much do you want us to put in there, boss? Kakuzu asked, and Naruto waved lazily. Whatever amount you think I may need while I'm there. And another mission for you is to find a suitable place for me to live, preferably a mansion with plenty of land. I don't care if it's old and the land is dying, as long as magic can restore it. Conan will help with finding a good house. Let me know if you find one. The two accounting officers of the Yakuza boss bobbed their heads with Conan, the only female in the gang Naruto fully trusted to have his back, most especially because she looked out for him when days were dark. The purple-haired woman placed a hand over her heart and bowed slightly in appreciation. I will appoint a representative that will take over in my stead while I'm away. He stood up and the gang members bowed their heads. He flipped his hand and motioned for them to leave his office. He opened a drawer on his desk and pulled out his mother's wand. He pointed it to a door to the left of him and said, "Accio broomstick." A cold black broom with white and red-tipped broomstick shot out from the storage room, and Naruto deftly caught it with his left hand. He looked over the first ever broom he bought as a Yakuza boss with a lopsided smile. The Wind Kraken 9 was a spectacular piece of magical technology created from Oto by Kabuto Yakushi, a magical technician and medic. Naruto had personally commissioned the gray-haired man to create the broom and ordered for it to be the only one in existence, with Naruto's 9th edition of the Wind Kraken being the last in the Wind Kraken line. Kabuto was smart enough to know what would happen if he attempted to make another Wind Kraken. The boss slung the broom onto his left shoulder and sauntered out of the door. 5 minutes later, and he reached the roof door. Impervious, the boss muttered, pointing his wand at the broomstick and at his clothes. The charm could only repel water and from inanimate objects, but was not as effective when used on a living creature. He would have to dry his body when he reached his intended destination. He dropped his broomstick onto the ground and transfigured a pair of thick, flight goggles from the doorknob of the door before him and snapped it on. Then he adjusted his suspenders and double-checked to see if his clothes were truly waterproof. He hated the feeling of wet clothing on his body. Naruto kicked open the door and hopped onto his broomstick, shooting out of the building roof in a boom of sharp wind and into the evening sky towards Oto to get his wand fitted. Chapter 2. Naruto bent down closer to his broomstick and gripped it with tight hands, squinting slightly as rain bounced off his flight goggles. He tucked his knees closer, but not completely together, and ensured his feet were securely behind him, close to the fiery wind-breathing sticks. He twisted his hands slightly and the stick screeched through the air in a heavy blast of wind, tearing through the heavy rain that pelted down from the sky. The screeching of his broomstick became low and barely noticeable as the boss twisted his hands again, quickly returning them back to their normal position. The result was another massive explosion of wind from his one-of-a-kind broomstick, closely breaking through the sound barrier and rocketing through the sky. The skin on his cheeks flapped and his red hair matted down with the rain, though his clothes remained perfectly dry, but his body was not the same. He vaguely guessed that he would be in Oto in roughly 10 minutes if he kept soaring at this breakneck speed, and he would get to the wand maker's shop 2 minutes after he broke through the Oto detection barrier. Enough time for him to fall back into a memory. It was 8 in the evening. Small, pale hands patted down the pockets of his black shorts and retrieved a 6-inch yellow, plastic wand with an artificial unicorn core. The child slung his arms through his red suspenders and snapped them onto his shoulders, as he proceeded to walk towards the massive stone-walled building that took up more than half of the fire capital. He rolled both of his shoulders, stomping towards the ministry headquarters with his black sneakers and red socks going up to his mid-shin. He smoothed down his carefully pressed, black shirt and stopped about 2 yards away from the building. The Ministry of Magic headquarters was a grand building that was just about as old as the whole country, with several stone dragons carved and placed around the top, and the windows, numbered over 10 dozen, peppered the building's ramparts. The walls were painted a dull gray and the colors warbled and warped, like it was all an illusion trying to hypnotize you, and that was how the magic worked around the ministry. Anyone that did not have a good reason, or intention, to come near the building was immediately detected and warded off. There was a big loophole in this. The ministry generally assumed that only adults could bear negative intentions. That if a child bore negative intentions, the enchantment would deem it unnecessary to warn the security system. Children were greatly underestimated in magical Japan, especially if you were a half-human. Naruto closed his eyes and slowly breathed in, holding the breath inside his lungs for a few short seconds before he breathed out. He repeated it once more and opened his gleaming purple eyes. His crimson-red hair spiked up and he bared his extremely sharp, serrated teeth. His small hands clenched the training wand strongly, and he continued his ill-intentioned walk towards the building where his adopted mother was currently taking a personal visit to her distant cousin, Hayashi Hyuga, at the top floor in his office. The 2 guards spotted the dark-clothed boy walk towards them, easily catching the training wand in his hand and the look in his eyes. His hollow, shattered purple eyes. Naruto raised his wand and pointed it at the guard to the right of the door. The man scoffed and lifted his wand to send a mild stunner to the child. Just a small warning for him to go back to wherever he came from, but his eyes widened like dinner plates at the words that came out of Naruto's mouth. Expelliarmus. His wand ripped out of his hand with enough strength to crack it down the middle, and it soared over Naruto's head. His partner was stunned for a moment, but not long enough for him to shoot 3 stunners at Naruto, aiming for his chest. The boy faced the attacker and swiped his sword in a reverse zigzag, muttering, "Protego." The stunning spells bounced off against the translucent silver shield conjured by the little boy. Naruto swiped the shield aside as soon as the 3rd one hit, spun aside from the 4th and 5th stunners, and hissed, "Bombarda." Boom! His target, the only guard wizard with his wand, exploded into bloody pieces, splashing blood into his partner's eyes and allowing the little killer to blast him to pieces as well. It was a good thing his intention wasn't to be silent. He had come to the ministry to kill his mother, but not only that, to also remove those that would prove a problem to him if he did not take care of them immediately. Ministry workers were exempted from the carnage he was going to raise. His purple eyes looked at the blood that stained the doors, the wall, and the ground on top of the staircase, and he winced. Maybe he got a little bit carried away. He walked up the stairs, his black sneakers splashing through the small puddles of blood and lightly staining the sides, thankfully not staining his socks. "Okay, starting now I won't kill ministry workers," Naruto whispered to himself resolutely. He pointed his plastic training wand to the great, wrought iron doors of the ministry and felt a small pushback preventing him from magically opening it. Like the enchantments around the building still considered him a non-threat, a simple half-human child, and was wavering in its place on whether or not to violently repulse him or not, but the soft barrier nudging Naruto back was strong enough to deflect a direct bombardment charm. The entire building was alit with alarms. Security forces rushed down to stand behind the door in preparation for the deadly wizard that was laying siege to their government's headquarters. Roughly 20 Oris gathered before the doors, brandishing their wands, while the 28 Yakuza in the building stayed close to the minister's office where their boss was currently in with the Minister of Magic. 5 of which closely guarded the minister's doors with dark, narrowed eyes, facing where the commotion was coming from. There was a ground-shaking roar on the other side of the door, and the door shook as something smashed against it. Ugh! Boom! This went on for 30 more seconds before silence. Deathly silence. 5 Oris prepared to walk forward and investigate, assuming it was a massive magical monster that was bashing its fists against the doors in a futile attempt at breaking in until the ground around the door cracked and the doors exploded inwards towards the gathered Oris. The Oris that were in front deflected the massive door and jointly levitated it aside. They looked back to the door, expecting a hulking figure to be standing there, but all they saw was a small, childish figure that was hidden by the streetlights illuminating from the outside of the ministry building. Thin fog rolled in from behind the child and flowed in, covering the wide reception room of the building in white mist. The Aurors narrowed their eyes and sharpened their senses, lowering their center of gravity to stay stable and mentally preparing themselves to make use of hand-to-hand when their wands failed to work. Naruto's purple iris contracted into small pin-like dots, searching through the fog he conjured up and finding dots of life here and there. He lowered his body and bolted in, a small blur of life that shot through the gradually thickening mist. He batted aside a stunner to his neck and leaped over another blazing red stunner, aiming his training wand at the attacker and whispering, "Ducklifors." Muddy brown light blinked from his wand and hit his target. The Jinx transformed the aura into a duck and Naruto ran past him, blasting a different spell at 4 Aurors. Levi Corpus. The Aurors shot into the air by their ankles and Naruto waved his wand in an anti-clockwise circle, forcing them to bash their heads together and knock them out so they wouldn't counter his Jinx. He skidded on his knees under a blast of sharp wind to his face and spun in a tight circle, hiding behind the massive moving statue of a burning flame at the center of the reception area. He peeked around the edge of the statue and swiped his wand down a little, saying, "Locomotor Mortis." The last attacker's legs stuck together and Naruto finished his curse off by sliding the fallen man back, separating him from his wand and slamming him against the wall. Naruto cursed under his breath and ducked back down as red-hot jets of water broke a corner of the statue close to his head, hardly 3 inches before the unforgiving, blistering hot jet of red water could scalp him. He coughed as small rocks and dust hit his face, though he thankfully closed his eyes before they could enter. He rubbed his upper arm on his face to wipe off the dust. The child then crawled on his knees to the other side of the living statue and peeked around it, cursing again as corporal, misty gray wolves rounded to him and snapped at his face. Naruto rolled backwards with his plastic wand clenched between his shark-like teeth, flipped onto his feet and back flipped 3 times over at least 8 full body-bind curses as well as the insistent gray wolves, numbered 3 in total. The boy finally stopped and rolled backwards underneath the open legs of a male Auror that made the mistake of not wearing his wizard cloak but rather a pair of stone-washed jeans and a plain white shirt. Naruto bolted forward and cracked his head into the man's back, violently shoving him into the wolves and distracting the wild animal summons. Naruto released his wand back into his hand. Antioculation. The hex made antlers break out of the fallen man's head and cage the wolves, doubling over as great weights that kept the man down. Naruto finished it off by shooting a single knockout curse. Naruto grit his teeth as he moved his shoulder away from a scathing hot hex. He moved his body and pointed at the wizard. Flipendo. There was a loud thud as the combined force of an invisible metal bull and an unseen marble elephant slammed into the man and cracked him against at least 4 more of his comrades, driving their unconscious forms into the wall. The boy closed his eyes and breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that all the Aurors were out cold. Most of the other Aurors or security officers of the building were either out on a mission or at home, which gave Naruto 15 minutes before they could arrive. Being the son of a Yakuza gave him the privilege of seeing the time schedule of the ministry workers. Now he had to worry about the Yakuza guards. A twisted smirk crawled onto Naruto's face. The 11-year-old half-human felt a shudder go through him as he broke through the detection barrier around the humble, but still bustling suburban community of Oto. He slowed down as he neared the gates and finally came to a halt before the gatekeeper's box. The redhead puffed out a thick, relieved breath and smiled wanly at the man standing at the gatekeeper's post. The guard raised an eyebrow at the tattooed child, shooting a glance at the sleeve tattoos on the kid's arms, furrowing his eyebrows as the redhead snapped his flight goggles onto his forehead and leaned back on his broomstick. "I'm here to see the wand maker." The man silently swept his eyes over the child. He looked over his shoulder at his equally curious partner, then back to the broomstick riding boy, searching his mind on where he had heard of such violent yet graceful body art designs. "Where are your legal guardians?" "All dead, but if they were here, they would probably send their regards." Naruto's abnormally large purple iris sparkled with childish innocence as he cheekily smiled, flashing his Kiri-patented teeth. Naruto then jutted his chin to the box and said in a low voice, a voice only the guard closest to him could hear, "Why don't you go back to your station? I'm sure you have a lot of work to do." The man opened his mouth to speak, but his words jammed in his throat as the child's massive iris shrank down to small pin-like dots and turned an evil shade of red. Naruto smirked a little and tilted his head to the side. "You can ask your mayor who I am later," Naruto continued in a quiet voice, adjusting his behind on the broomstick so that he could sit up straight and look into the man's eyes. "But as you can see, I'm soaking wet and I don't like being wet." The fear of Kami was in the man. He knew what danger was, what danger looked like, and the boy was danger incarnate, but despite this he shakily uttered, "What's your name?" "Naruto." The boy's pupils returned back to their normal, large size, and he slowly flew through the gates, slow enough for the guards to see him and debate on whether or not to call him back. He shrugged and flew on, his hands tightly wrapped around his broomstick but not in a relaxed position. Oto was not a tightly packed magical location. The roads were made out of colorful, cobbled stone, and the sky was almost as colorful, distorting and changing with the increasing sound of the people going about their daily lives underneath it. There were several shops set up that mostly sold knickknacks and souvenirs for tourists that always visited Oto, the suburb of sound, but there were also shops that sold musical instruments and enchanted instruments that could play by themselves. The suburb might have been over 200 years old, but it tried to keep true to its sound-based origin. The child stopped before a humble, stone building that had a single wooden door and 3 glass windows. It looked to be half the size of a regular residential building, and it was squeezed between 2 large, influential shops, a sweet shop and a toy emporium. Looking at it made Naruto feel like the 2 shops, the sweet and toy shops, did not like to be near each other, but there was still a small gap to fill, so they decided to squeeze a house between them. At the top of the shop floated the words Sannin Wand Maker, established in 1745. The words drifted together and changed to a different sentence: the country's best, and only, wand makers. The boss dropped off his broomstick and hefted the magical item onto his left shoulder, patting down his right pocket to make sure his mother's wand was still there, before he entered the wand store. The water on his clothes flowed down his body and pooled under his feet with each determined step, leaving behind a few puddles on the bright cobblestone street until no water left again. It was a simple charm on his clothes that drained water out as soon as he was out of the rain, nothing too special. Bells tinkled above the red head, and a shower of soft red and silver sparkles rained down on him. He ignored them and inquisitively looked around. The store was deceptively small and was possibly as large as a library on the inside, as expected of a wand store as old as the one he was in. There were rows and rows of shelves neatly stacked with different colored boxes that looked eerily like shoe boxes. Naruto looked down to the floor and sniffed as he saw dark green carpet with a sleek, silver serpent drawn at the very center where the shelves surrounded in a wide circle and a desk with scattered papers was located. The silver serpent was wrapped around a golden slug, both of their heads gently met serenely. Behind the desk was a door leading into the back room. The boy looked to his right and grunted as he dropped his broomstick on the broomstick rack, leaning it against the wall. "A customer!" A voice yelped from the desk, and the scattered pile of multicolored scrolls scattered even more as a black head shot up, blearily looking at the person standing at the door. Her sleepy mind saw a child, but she didn't recognize him. "But school admission isn't for 4 months. Calm down, Shizen." A calm, silky smooth voice said as the backroom door opened. Reptilian eyes glowed with glee as it rested on Naruto. "I have to say, dear child, I've been expecting you for a whole year." "I take it today is Lady Tsunade's day off," the girl said with a sigh. "Yes," Orochimaru replied without looking away from the slightly guarded boy. "I think it's best if you find her before she sells the rights to our shop to another mob boss." Again Shizen whispered in disappointment, making Naruto smile a little. Tsunade was an unrepentant gambler. Even he knew of the time she had gambled away the wand maker's shop. He was the one she lost to. "I'll be right back." As she ran past Naruto, Orochimaru said after her, "Take your time, Shizen." The door closed, leaving the 10-year-old child with the 50-something-year-old man. Orochimaru smirked sharply and placed his hands behind his back, leisurely walking towards the boy. "I'm honored you came to my shop, young master." "I came to get my wand fitted," Naruto replied, meeting the man's snake-like eyes with his large eyes, having to tilt his head back to do so. "Then let us get to it," the Sannin said and clapped his hands together. "Your wand hand?" "I'm ambidextrous," the child answered as he raised both of his hands up close to his, Naruto's, face and wiggled them. The man raised an enthralled eyebrow and hissed. "I see." His right hand swished over to the shelf to his immediate side, and a gleaming silver ladder skidded into his hand from the opposite end of the shelf. "It's not every day I fit an ambidextrous boy." He hissed out a chuckle under his breath, running his hand over the boxes and mentally commanding the ladder to slowly move to the left. Tsunade would be so jealous. Naruto followed the man with his eyes, his iris dilated to be as large and as reflective as that of a wide-eyed, innocent child. It was the image he liked to use. There were metamorphmagus that could change the forms of their whole bodies or part of their bodies either at will, or depending on their emotion. Naruto was not able to change his whole body, but he was able to change his eyes, whether it was the whole eyeball or just his iris. He could expand or shrink his iris to make his vision sharper at dire situations, like the battle at the ministry. Dilated pupils could also serve close to the same purpose as small pupils, but they allowed in too much light, and the images were not as sharp. Making his pupils smaller also helped scare the fear of Kami into anyone that made him angry. The last time an ambidextrous person got fitted with a wand in Mai and Tsunade's shop was about 35 years ago. Orochimaru grunted as he threw boxes over his shoulder, and wispy gray and green wind carried them down, dropping them gently onto a large wooden table that had been conjured out of nowhere in the space close to the receptionist's desk. The most excitable kid I have ever seen, the man cast a quick look to the silent, diligently listening mafia boss, then threw the 8-box down and slid down the ladder in one fluid motion, making his robes flutter but not lift over his head. He looks a lot like you really, except the man pursed his lips and furrowed his eyes, studying the 11-year-old child. He was blonde, poor, and much too interested in wand lore. Naruto laughed and walked to the conjured desk as Orochimaru motioned for him to come closer. The Sannin stood opposite the boy. Interested in wand lore? I thought you said he was a kid. The man quirked up a corner of his lips, a sarcastic facial expression. He wanted to know if it was possible to have up to 9 cores in a wand. This suddenly got Naruto's attention. The boy placed both of his hands on the desk and his iris quivered, expanding and shrinking in expectation. And? The man raised an eyebrow and pushed a golden box with 2 red strips going diagonally down its side. Ignoring the question, he said, "Try this." The child suppressed the irritated eyebrow twitch he felt traveling all the way up his body to his face. He removed the lid of the box and pulled out the wand. 7-inch warble wood with a manate core main core. The snake Sannin motioned for him to make a clockwise circle and Naruto did so. A small spurt of black smoke blew out from the tip and washed onto the man's face. Orochimaru coughed and pushed another box to Naruto. The boy dropped the wand and removed the lid of his next choice. Inside was a dark pink wand that sparkled. The boy was about to touch it, but the wand curled away from his hand and screamed. Ai! Naruto had to take a step back and hold up his hands before the wand finally calmed down. Orochimaru hummed and scratched his chin, idly watching as the wand pushed against the corner of its box, away from Naruto, trembling. That was a 7-inch wave country ashen tree with a siren hair core. He seemed genuinely surprised the wand had reacted so terrifyingly. He nudged the box away and passed another to Naruto. This time, as the boy was about to touch the lid, the entire box burst on fire. Whoops, Naruto muttered, deadpan, looking up at the pensive man. Orochimaru frowned and regarded the pile of ash on the table with disdain. Curious. Do all your wands usually do this? The boss asked with a slight frown. He placed his hand on another box and it suddenly became soggy with water. The boy ground his teeth and threw off the lid, not caring anymore. He grabbed the wand and the poor magical item flopped bonelessly in his hand, giving him what young children and immature teenagers did when they did not want to cooperate with their parents, the toddler. If Naruto could glare any harder at the quivering, spiritless wand in his hand, the wand might have actually died. 6-inch CC wood with a sea dragon tail hair core. The man pointlessly pointed out instinctively. People from Kiri usually flow well with this wand. I'm not from Kiri, the redhead said with narrowed eyes, casting the floppy wand into the man's grip. You need to recheck your teeth and your magical core, dear child, the man said as he handed another box to Naruto. This time the wand allowed Naruto to pick it up, but as the child waved it over his head, a column of green fire blasted out from the tip and darkened the pristine white ceiling of the wand maker store. The boss hastily dropped the wand, but it kept on pouring out toxic green fire from its tip, sputtering and quivering like a fish out of water. Naruto bared his teeth and spat, grating in a low voice as Orochimaru dove over the table and tackled the wand with a brown sack. I never gave you permission to check my magical core, snake. The man wrestled with the rogue wand, containing the flames with the brown sack. He grunted as he rolled on the ground. The sensors at the door allow us to check on a customer's, he coughed, and stashed the sack into his sleeve, summoning his wand from his other sleeve and dousing the burning flames. It allows us to know which kind of wand fits our customers better. The man smoothed down his robe and crossed to the other side of the table again. It isn't a breach on privacy because the ministry gave US express permission as long as we don't use the information against our customers. The boy silently glared at him, his eyes quivering. Orochimaru clapped his hand and waved his hand over his shoulder. I didn't want to resort to testing this wand out, but you're a special case. A black box coated with shadows zipped out from a tile before the desk. The man squinted his eyes as he looked at it, waving his wand for it to drop before the boy. We have been known to never leave a customer unsatisfied. I even fitted the owner of that wand, and it took 7 tries before she found it. The boy felt a frown twitch onto his face at the slight mention of his adopted mother as the man looked around the boy at the Vila core wand jutting out from his back pocket. Naruto moved aside, blocking the man's view, and Orochimaru coughed. The last time I had a hard time finding a perfect fit for a customer was with the last ambidextrous child. I was about to bring out this very wand, He pointed his 8-inch Hydra heartstrings core with snow python scale wand at the black pulsing box. But he found his match before that. He gently prodded the box and it slowly slithered towards Naruto, who watched, enraptured. "Give it a try." Naruto placed his hand on the lid and flicked it off with his pointer finger. His hand hovered over the box, the darkness throbbing from the box increased as he did so. The wand was coal black with a glowing red tip. He breathed in and his nose flared as he breathed out. He picked up the wand and there was a small thud. The shelves, the pictures, the walls, even the very air, seemed charged with energy as he did so. Orochimaru's cloak flared around him, gripping his wand tightly, and using his magic to maintain order in his and Tsunade's shop. The redhead felt heat travel up his arm and cover his body, before it was quickly doused by a watery sensation from the wand. He closed his eyes as he heard a low whimper, then an willing yip echo through his mind. He cracked open his eyes and looked at the 13th generation wand maker. The man lifted up his wand and waved it in a small, irregular circle, motioning for Naruto to do so as well. The boy did so and red and black sparkles blasted out from the tip of his wand. As they dropped around they burst on fire, harmlessly touching the wizards and extinguishing on the ground. The Sannin opened his mouth, then he closed it, shocked. He began explaining. 9-inch god tree wood with a Kyubi no Kitsune tail core. His hands trembled, watching as the entertained boy kept on waving his wand, shooting out different colored sparks that ended up on fire. There is only 3 variations of this in existence, one of which I made and the other Tsunade crafted. The boy might not look like it, as he played with the wand by sweeping it around, testing out a few harmless spells, arranging the boxes into a neat stack on the table and mopping off the water from the ground, but he was very interested to hear what the man was about to say. Yuzushio scribe tree and Kitsune core, made by my wife, and a god tree and Kiri hummingbird heartstrings I made. Naruto knew the story of the god tree and the Kitsune very well. The god tree only allowing those that were balanced with nature chakra to approach and collect its bark. The god tree shriveled up and died when all 9-tailed beasts left the earth. While the dead demon, Kyubi no Kitsune, unknowingly dropped 2 strands of his tail hair during its fight with all 8 of his siblings. The beast had banished all of his siblings back to the underworld before it was killed. People weren't sure who had killed it but most suspected it was Kagaya. The proof of its death was when the immortal Kitsune clan of Yuzushio began dying off of old age. Only one with demon heritage can wield that wand. The man holstered his wand and said in a low voice. "Do you know of your heritage, young master?" "Somewhat," the boy replied mysteriously as he stashed his wand at his back pocket, beside the Vila core wand. The man raised a curious eyebrow at this. Both wand cores were supposed to negatively react to each other, but shrugged it off, guessing that since Naruto was able to use the Vila core and the Kitsune core at the same time, then they should be in a sort of mutual agreement not to oppose each other. The boy's large eyes looked up at the Sannin, and he reached into his right front pocket. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing," the man replied quickly. He smiled slightly. "I'm just glad that wand has finally found an owner." His eyes dimmed as he thought. The boy looked at the man suspiciously, slipping his hand out of his pocket. "All right. Thank you." He walked to his broomstick and hefted it onto his shoulder. Something seemed to click in Orochimaru's eyes as he said, just as the boy opened the door to leave. "Oh, and if you can give this store a 5-star review of Banshee Screech, I'd really appreciate it." "I'll do that," Naruto promised and waved over his shoulder. A few weeks later. Platform 9 3/4. King's Cross Station. The boss leisurely walked behind 3 tall adults in a simple pair of gray sweatpants and a long-sleeved gray shirt, carrying a red backpack on his back and black trainers on his feet. He closely followed the 3 adults as they created a path for him to walk through. One of the adults, a man in a bowler hat with glowing green eyes and a dark green mask over his lower jaw, wearing a formal black suit and in a pair of black polished shoes, was dragging along a large rectangular suitcase in his right hand. The next adult, a purple-haired woman in a sparkling black dress that went a bit under her knees with a red cloud clip on her right chest, carried a side bag that was magically expanded to fit all of Naruto's required books. The third adult was a redhead with dull brown eyes wearing a red sweater and black slacks. He carried a silver cage with a brown owl that had its head tucked into its wing, fast asleep despite the noise of families and children in the station. Naruto's eyes looked around at the numerous people helping their children onto the train. He spotted a family tearfully bidding themselves goodbye, hugging and sobbing on the child, a bubble-gum-haired girl that wiggled uncomfortably in the arms of her pink-haired mother. The girl tried not to roll her eyes as her father placed a firm hand on her shoulder. His chin was strong, like his jaw was clenched shut to stop him from crying too. The girl sighed and nodded mechanically to their advice. She furrowed her eyebrows when her eyes met the bright purple eyes of Naruto. The boy looked away from her as Sasori politely tapped his shoulder. Kakuzu was behind the man, guarding the suitcase now with the owl cage sitting on top and the side bag slung over his shoulder, and Conan was standing with her hands laced together in front of her. Sasori snapped his fingers and Kakuzu cast a privacy bubble around them, standing several feet away from the train in the crowd of people. Sir, Naruto nodded for him to speak, his eyes idly looking around at the children and parents swarming around the gleaming red train. Do you still remember the address to your new home? Yes. And the name of your goblin account manager? Yes. Shifty D. Shank. He still found it hard to believe that the goblin managing his money was named Shifty Shank, but apparently the old goblin was respected for being a top banker in Gringotts. If you need anything, no matter how frivolous, please, sir, let us know and we will get it for you immediately, Conan said with cold eyes, but the redhead briefly looked at her and he nodded, catching sight of the worry buried deep down in her soul. Okay. But just in case, I took the privilege of packing money into your suitcase. Kakuzu grunted and the boy smiled fleetingly. Thank you? He pursed his lips and adjusted his backpack with a shrug. I wrote to Dumbledore yesterday that Conan is my guardian. I still want you two to remain in the country unless I say otherwise. Of course, boss, Sasori said with a discreet dip of his head. He shuffled aside for Naruto to walk past him, taking hold of his suitcase from Kakuzu, collecting the side bag and slinging it on. The masked man cast a temporarily stick charm on the cage for it to stay fastened onto the suitcase. Stay alert, he said to the 3 loyal Akatsuki members. If there is anything that needs my urgent attention, then send a letter or come to the school in person, depending on the importance. His pupils contracted in warning as he glared at his 3 subordinates. The last option of coming to the school in person is only for life or death situations, understood? Yes, boss. Good. I'll see you 3 later. He nodded to them and puffed a breath out as he fully beheld the red train that would transport all the students to Hogwarts. As the other children struggled to lug their bags, pets and books into the train, Naruto didn't have that much of a problem. Spell and wand work weren't the only things he focused on while Kagaya was still alive. He had also been made to exercise. The boy looked around sharply, noticing that only the extremely excited children that pelted towards the train didn't find it hard, while those that were hesitant to leave their parents had to put in a lot of effort to drag their luggage. He huffed and panted as he pulled his things, gasping in effort as he dropped them onto the train, deciding to pretend he was having trouble. The boy passed by several older students that were stomping around and trying to get the energetic first years into compartments. The boy silently pulled his things with him, peering into compartments and frowning at the fact that they were full. The train's passageways were emptying of students, and he could hear the train wail in preparation to begin moving. The redhead quickly shuffled down the corridor. He slid open one of the doors at the far back of the train's 10 carriage and sighed in relief when he saw it was completely empty. He entered and closed the door. Then he slipped his right hand into his pocket and retrieved his new wand, smiling at the warmth that pulsed and resonated from the wand and through his body. He swished his wand to his luggage and his suitcase levitated onto an open compartment above the seats to the right. The side bag and backpack joined in and Naruto smiled in at his accomplishment. He picked up the owl cage and set it onto the soft chair, plopping down beside it and looking out of the window. He spotted Conan and the rest standing close to the edge of the platform. The woman lifted her left hand and waved, a small, real smile on her lips. Naruto beamed at them and waved back. The female Akatsuki member kept on waving until the train was out of sight. She looked to the men standing beside her, her face reverting back to its default, stoic expression. Let's get back to work, the mansion still needs renovating. I also have an appointment with Madame Bones, Kakuzu supplied. There was still the matter of sorting out their source of income so as not to draw the attention of the authorities in the country. As far as they knew, only the fat minister knew who they were. Kakuzu was applying to be an Auror and Sasori was also going to apply but as a curse breaker, but only after he had finished adding security measures to his boss bank vault as well as transferring more than half of the Sarutobi fortune into the Gringotts bank account. The woman nodded and all 3 left the station to go about their functions. Inside Naruto's compartment, the boy kept his wand on his lap and gently pried open the cage of his new owl. The light brown bird trilled softly, looking up at its owner. The owl was a present from the Sand siblings, a male sun scorcher owl from Suna. The bird shivered happily as Naruto ran his right pointer finger down its head, hooting in encouragement and hopping closer to the finger. The boy removed his hand from inside the cage and looked out of the window at the lush fields rushing by the red train. He placed his elbow onto the window and leaned onto his palm. To be honest, I don't know why I agreed to come here, he said. The owl peered at his master and cocked its head to the side curiously, listening to Naruto as the boy spoke to him. Maybe it's because I still respect my grandfather, or maybe it's my way of honoring him, my uncle and aunt. The owl hooted and a tiny, shaky smile wiggled onto the pale boy's face. His eyes reflected back to him on the window, and he tiredly placed his forehead onto the glass, closing his eyes. "What do you think, Saru?" Saru the brown owl shook his feathers and lowly screeched. "You don't know, huh? Then I guess we'll just have to wait and see." He opened his eyes and turned around when he heard the door slid open. The girl with pink hair poked her head in and her eyes lit up when she saw that it was the curious redhead that had met her eyes more than a few minutes ago. "Hello?" Naruto gave her a lopsided smile and replied, "Hi." He looked past her and his eyebrows went up when he saw a large suitcase, similar to his, standing behind her with a green satchel sitting on top. She followed his eyes and her cheeks turned red. The guys in the other compartment were being rude. Naruto stood up and motioned for her to come in. "It's fine, there's plenty of room in here." She nodded her thanks and dragged her things in with effort. The boy went over and helped her. The two lifted the suitcase over their heads and pushed it into a free luggage compartment over the seats on the left side. The girl straightened her mid-thigh length green dress, subtly lifting up her black and white striped leggings, which went into her black shoes. Her smile glowed as she shoved her right hand into Naruto's face for a handshake. "My name is Nymphadora Tonks." "Naruto." The boy carefully shook her hand, taking his seat back next to his owl. The girl gawked at the owl, who ruffled its beak through its wings. "What kind of owl is that?" "Asuna Sun Scorcher," Naruto replied as the girl hesitantly reached in. The boy urged her on with an eager nod. "He was a present from a friend of mine. His name is Saru." The girl ran her fingers on the owl's head and the bird looked from her to Naruto, then back to the girl. Tonks didn't seem to notice this as she kept on stroking the owl. Saru quietly trilled at the attention and the girl giggled. "He's awfully friendly. He just likes you." "My parents said they won't get me an owl because I'm not going to properly look after it," she suddenly said in a quick splash of words. "I wanted to get a black cat." "Why a black cat?" Tonks stepped back and gently moved the cage aside, sitting down next to the boy. Naruto forced away the irritated frown at the girl's clearly unconscious action. The girl was used to being close to those she talked to. The small handful of friends she had as well as her parents were used to the bubbly girl's almost clingy personality. "My dad used to have a cat named Sylvester when he was a first year and my mom got us a house cat when I was 6 but it ran away." The redhead uncomfortably tried to shuffle away from the girl, closer to the window, but there wasn't enough space to do that. "I hear Neasels are amazing starter pets, and they allow them in Hogwarts too." "My mom said that too, but I don't want one, I want a cat," the girl insisted, literally putting her foot down. Her eyes lit up again, and she petted Naruto's left knee once and asked, "But enough about me, do you have an older brother or sister that used to go here?" The boy had to summon as much self-control he could muster so that he wouldn't lash out in irritation at the nice girl. He could see it in her eyes. She was just trying to make a new friend, and seeing as he wasn't chasing her away, she took it as a sign that he wanted to be her friend too. Her assumption wasn't wrong since Naruto also wanted to make a friend, but he mentally made a note to teach her about personal space. The redhead winced as Tonks shuffled closer again, pressing the side of her right thigh tightly against his left. His annoyed wince made him flash his serrated teeth, much to the morbid awe of the pink-haired girl. "My Aunt Akuma used to go here." "Really? What did she say about the sorting?" Naruto shrugged and his eyes wondered. "She didn't say anything." The girl looked deep into his eyes, even as he refused to look at her, and the young girl managed to detect sadness in the redhead's eyes. She placed a small, gentle hand on the back of his left hand, making Naruto quickly bare his teeth, snapping them closed and breathing out to calm down. He ripped his hand out of hers and placed them on his other knee, trying to show the girl, as non-violently as possible, that he was not a fan of physical contact. She seemed to understand his subtle message, but the question in her mind wiped out his warning. "Were you born with your teeth like that?" "Like what?" Naruto looked at her from the corner of his eyes. "All pointy and sharp." He silently nodded and the girl pursed her lips in thought. "My mom told me that the only people with your kind of teeth are of the house Namikaze in Kiri, Japan. But they're all," she grimaced as she again walked into yet another topic of the boy's dead relatives. She pouted and her eyebrows furrowed deeply as her mind rushed to find another topic to talk about with her potential friend, frantically scraping through everything she knew so that she wouldn't mess up her chance. "My father was a Namikaze," Naruto abruptly said, looking at her from the corner of his eyes, but this time he added a forgiving smile. The girl found herself smiling back. She squeezed his hand, her hair slowly changing to a lighter shade of red than Naruto's. "Well, I think they're really cool." His eyes momentarily darkened with frustration. Either the girl knew his aversion and chose to ignore it, thinking he wouldn't simply kill her and frame her death on another student, or she was simply that ditzy as to not see how painfully uncomfortable he was. He looked up at her hair, then down into her dark brown eyes. "You're a metamorphomagus." She beamed proudly. "So?" Naruto smirked at her sharply, exposing his shark-like teeth, and his iris quivered, expanding and contracting until it finally settled in between, changing from bright purple to dark brown. "I'm half metamorphomagus, shapeshifter, from my mother's side." Kitsune, while being a race of foxes that could take any form they wanted, preferably human form, were direct descendants of the nine-tailed demon fox, gifted with the ability to shape-shift. The girl's grin widened unimaginably, and both of her hands gripped Naruto's left hand, looking at him with matching brown eyes. "I didn't think it was possible for you to get any cooler." The Suna owl shivered and settled back comfortably into its cage as the two 11-year-old wizards conversed. Tonks took charge of their conversation, rattling on and on about what she thought Hogwarts would be like, throwing small questions to her new friend to get his input, whereas Naruto was content to simply listen. The sorting of the new students went by alphabetically, so even for those that did not have any surname, or refused to bear surnames for personal reasons. Naruto was the only student in Hogwarts that did not have a surname, and as his name was called, hearing Tonks scream encouragements from the Hufflepuff table and George Weasley, a first year, banging his fist on the Gryffindor table with his housemates to get another redhead into their house. The Ravenclaws sized the boy up as he smoothly walked up to the stool, his black, unmarked cloak rustling with each step, and the Slytherin were hissing among themselves, trying to come up with why a distinguished-looking first year had no last name. The redhead sniffed and steeled his eyes, shooting a look up at his grandfather's niece, then to the stool. "You can do it, Naruto!" Tonks' yell reached his ears. The boy sat down and closed his eyes as the hat was dropped onto his head, covering his eyes. I wonder was it wise for Albus to allow you here?" the hat murmured in the half-human's head. "I'm here because my grandfather wanted me here." Naruto bit back defensively. The hat chuckled. "Oh, that's right, your grandfather. You don't need to be here, but you're confusing loyalty to his house with curiosity to know. If you wish to honor the house Sarutobi, then why did you not take their name?" Naruto's lips were straight, and his shoulders stiffened, his fingers tightly clasping the sides of the stool. "You feel an obligation to the Sarutobi, rest their souls, but you're ashamed to take their name." "I'm not ashamed to take their name." "Because of your tattoos." The hat finished, and Naruto felt his heart thud in his chest as the shame the hat knew resided in his chest began to overcome him. "I find it honorable that you are more devoted to the Sarutobi than your parents. The Uzumaki and Namikaze, two tragic stories I hope will never be seen again, are highly family-oriented, a great trait for a Hufflepuff." "Then put me in Hufflepuff," Naruto asserted. "So you can be with your new friend? That's another thing, you met this girl only a few hours ago, and you are already a reliable friend, just like she is part of your gang family, a core trait for a Gryffindor." The hat mused on. "You are already well studied in most of the magical arts, and you still bear the Kitsune mark, nature of curiosity to know, a highly regarded value for the Ravenclaw. You're a half-human from two pure-blood houses, which makes you somewhat of a pure-blood, much more than you are a half-blood. Above all that, your refusal to take either of your parents' names stems from your belief that you are not worthy enough to bear them, almost like you doubt you are worthy to bear the great Sarutobi name, another pure-blood clan you are affiliated with. Oh, and let's not forget the Otsutsuki house, yet another pure-blood house, albeit Vila house. That makes 4 pure-blood houses. If that isn't Slytherin, then I don't know what is. Because I am connected to 4 pure-blood houses is what makes me Slytherin." "No," the hat said. "Because you love all 4 houses in your strange, admittedly twisted way, and your dark, shady upbringing under your late adopted mother make you a Slytherin." The hat bellowed and the green and silver table roared. Naruto got up and looked down at his cloak. A Slytherin badge popped onto his left chest and the dark green colors of the snake house rippled on. The boy walked to his table, where he got appreciative looks from his housemates. He sat down and looked up, searching for his first friend at the table closest to the Slytherins. His now purple eyes found Tonks' brown eyes and the girl shrugged a little. A disappointed look marred her face. When it was time to feast, Naruto wasted no time standing up and plodding over to the Hufflepuff table. He frowned when he saw the yellow house become cautious at his arrival. He sat down at the end of the table, a bit away from the other Hufflepuff. "PSSSSSSST," he said in a low voice to his upset friend. He exhaled in frustration and hissed again. This time a third-year Hufflepuff, a boy that had noticed how the pink-haired first year was squealing encouragements to the now Slytherin boy, jabbed his elbow into Tonks' side. When the girl rounded on him to yell into his face, he jabbed his thumb at Naruto and served himself a large spoonful of chicken soup. The girl's eyes enlarged and she gasped. "Naruto?" The boy waved for her to come over to the end of the table, and Tonks almost stumbled backwards off her bench as she leaped over it. She slid close to her friend and greeted him with a happy smile. The boy flashed her a smile and looked up to the rest of the house, who raptly watched them. He looked back at her and whispered, "I thought we could have our first dinner in Hogwarts together." Tonks bit her bottom lip to hold in a squeal, suppressing it all into a tight, quick hug. She reached forward on the table and served her new friend a plate of custard pie and pumpkin juice. The two ate their food, and Tonks chattered on about one thing or the other as Naruto listened. The Slytherin ignored the glares that burned into the back of his head from Slytherin table. The teacher's table. A pair of eyes watched attentively as Naruto ate with his friend, a hidden smirk on his face. He crinkled his nose as he saw genuine happiness show through the calm boy's eyes as the girl rattled on about something concerning one of her cousins. He couldn't care to listen. He knew better, that child was a killer. He would sooner kill the girl as soon as he stopped being amused by her. He nibbled his chicken, briefly looking down as Naruto's eyes snapped at him. The boy maintained his gaze on the staring teacher's face, his eyes narrowed suspiciously, before his attention was brought back by Tonks. The man licked his lips discreetly and tipped a goblet into his mouth, sipping the contents politely, and setting it down to watch the boy once again. The woman is stubborn, refusing to tell me the location of the silver coin. His hand unconsciously clenched on his goblet. I wonder how much more she can take. A small voice whispered in his head and he closed his eyes, listening to the voice command him. He opened his eyes and looked around to make sure no one had noticed his lack of attention as Flitwick told the story. He smiled politely and nodded along with the others. "You will lead me to the coin, boy." Chapter 3. First years will be staying here, a seventh-year Slytherin said as she motioned to the corridor filled with doors. The names of boys were on the left while girls were on the right. On the doors was a short brown scroll with two names spelt out. You will find a door that bears your names and your luggage would be inside it. Those will be the rooms you maintain until you enter your second year. The first-year snake surged past the dull girl, peering at the scrolls. There was a small flicker of blue electricity as a first-year was repelled back a step as he touched a door. The girl sighed and added, "That's what happens when you try and enter a room that isn't yours. Do try not to let it happen again. That is the main rule. Another is for boys and girls to stay out of the other's room, and finally, public nudity will not be tolerated. Follow these rules and your stay in Hogwarts will be exciting and eventful." The first years looked at each other blandly. The senior's voice conveyed as much enthusiasm as a sleeping walrus. The older girl turned around and walked up the small flight of stairs to the common room. "Classes start on Monday. Use the weekend to get used to life here." And she was gone. Naruto waited for all the bustle for rooms to settle down and the first years crowding the corridors reduced before he proceeded to look for his room on the left side, seeing as this was where boys' rooms were. He wasn't used to rubbing shoulders with people. He led a gang of people that held high respect and reverence of its leader, and they made it a point to not physically touch their leader, most especially unintentionally. This was not so when the child was still under his mother's tutelage, but it had changed as soon as he took over the gang. It wasn't a matter of pride, the boy was simply self-conscious about being touched. His shoulders stiffened as a small group of excited girls ran past him. When it came to his first, and so far only, friend in Hogwarts, he tried not to mind because the girl was used to friendly, intimate contact. He still had that lecture on personal space planned out, but only when she pushed too close. He found his door. The redhead read the other name on the paper, Perry Bones, and opened the door. The dorm room showed the pride of the Slytherin house. There was a large green and silver banner at the back with the badge of the house fixed in the middle, not moving. The beds were at opposite sides of the room, dressed in deep green bed sheets with silver pillows sitting at the top. A desk for each side of the room and the suitcases were pushed under the bed. The bed on the right side was occupied by a ginger-haired boy with black eyes and a light dusting of freckles on his cheeks. He was currently curled up on his bed, fully dressed in his green and silver robes, fast asleep. The half-human moved to his corner of the room and sat down on his bed, wincing at the pained creaks he heard from the bed springs. He looked under his bed and pulled out his side bag, throwing it onto his desk and yanking out his backpack from under the bed as well, tossing it to the end of his bed and pushing it off so that it fell onto the ground next to the desk, remarkably not opening or tearing. He then stood up and pulled out his Kitsune core wand, dropping it on his bed, next to his pillow, and pulling off his Slytherin cloak to show his gray shirt and sweatpants. He folded his cloak and tugged out his suitcase, dropping the cloak inside and retrieving a short-sleeved Slytherin shirt that had formerly been blank but changed its form as soon as Naruto was sorted. He found a pair of black pants and quickly changed into his new clothes, stuffing his gray clothing into his suitcase and pushing it back under his bed with his right foot. He picked up his wand and shoved it into his left front pants pocket, casting a look at his knocked-out dorm room partner, Before he trudged to the door to explore the rest of Slytherin House, the rest of the castle could wait until the next day. He raised his hand to open his door but paused when a strong knock sounded. He opened the door, and standing outside were 4 7-years and a 6th year, all of whom towered over the red-haired first year. The boy looked up at them and smirked faintly. Evening. They clearly looked like they were trying to intimidate him, with the way they hunched their shoulders to look taller, glared down at him and wore heavy frowns on their faces. The apparent leader of the group, the lone 6th year standing before the 4 7th years, cleared his throat and said, "We didn't like that stunt you pulled during supper." Naruto was genuinely confused, and his curiously tilted head showed it. "What stunt?" The 6th year, a brown-haired boy still wearing the house cloak, growled. "Don't act dumb, you know what I'm talking about." Naruto shrugged. "I really don't." The boy lifted up his right pointer finger and grounded. "A Slytherin sitting at the Hufflepuff table. Disgusting." He jabbed Naruto's chest and a twitchy smile flicked on his face. "And I don't want to ever see you do that again, understood?" A sly smile slithered onto the boy's face, and he looked over his shoulders to his equally proud friends, pleased that they had scared a first year. The redhead slowly looked down to his chest at the place the older boy had poked, his smile becoming toothy and wild. His eyes tightened into a tiny dot, changing from purple to red. Then he looked back up, his lips softly smiling and his purple eyes dilated to look naive and innocent. The kitsune part of him, the one that was roaring for blood at being challenged, was what pushed Naruto to ask. "Or what?" The 6th year's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" First years were now looking out of their rooms and eavesdropping on their talk, muttering and whispering about the nameless boy that had sat at the Hufflepuff table with his friend. Naruto's smile widened, darkening his face, and he took a cautious step forward, making the 6th year step back into his friends. "I asked or what?" The boy suddenly found his tongue. His nostrils flared as he hissed. "How dare you?" "What is going on here?" a nasally voice asked from behind the 7 years. The older students spun around and their eyes widened when they saw their house head, Severus Snape. The first years hurriedly closed their doors or ran up the stairs to the common room. Those in their rooms pressed their ears to the door to listen in on what was going to happen next. The man looked down his sharp nose at the students. "Well?" It was the leader of the small gang that spoke. "Naruto here was picking a fight with us." 4 7 years and a 6th year standing in front of a first year's dorm room with their wands drawn, he said, his sharp eyes catching the 3 of the 7 years quickly stash away their wands into their cloaks. "It would be wise not to lie to me, Mr. Nailisver." "But sir—" "Leave, before I start docking points," the man ordered, glaring the 6th year snake into submission. Immediately. He watched the older students troop out and up the stairs, but not before shooting a dirty look at the unruffled red head. The man then looked to the boy. "I do not know if it is how you were brought up and I do not want to know, but you better control your temper." The boy silently stared at the man, masterfully deflecting a mind probe. He then said, "If this is how students behave, then I assure you I will get used to it." "Good." The man turned around and said, "And make sure you keep your nose clean." The redhead was mildly offended by that remark. He whispered sharply to the man, "Contrary to what you may or may not think, my nose has always been clean." The man nodded curtly and walked up the stairs and out of the house common room to his office. The man shook his head in exasperation and rolled his neck. He didn't know if Dumbledore told all the teachers and staff in the school that he was a mafia boss, but at least it would make them more cautious around him. It would make him stand out, but it would also drive away people that thought he was easy prey. The redhead walked up the stairs to the Slytherin common room and sat down on a seat with a small coffee table before him and 5 other seats spread out around the table. There was another seat facing roaring fire behind the seat directly in front of him, several couches where older students lounged out and chattered. The boy looked to the table and saw a few old newspapers scattered on it. He curiously looked at the only other person sitting on a chair around the table, a second-year boy with silver hair and silver eyes, and saw that the boy was reading the day's newspaper. A few other students had the other issues of that day's newspaper, leaving only older copies. The redhead shrugged and picked up the oldest copy on the table, relaxing deep into his chair. Might as well start learning something. The next day, during breakfast, was when Naruto received his class schedule. He immediately went to his only friend's table and showed her, comparing what he had to what she did. First year Slytherin only had 3 classes with first year Hufflepuff, all of which were bunched up on herbology on Wednesday in the morning, transfiguration on Thursday in the evening, and history on Friday in the morning. Tonks was still happy to hear that she would have at least 3 classes with her new friend. She helped serve Naruto a bowl of pudding and nudged the bowl to him, handing him a spoon as she spoke. I was thinking we should hang out by the lake and see if we can spot a sea monster, then after that we can check out the greenhouse. I overheard a fourth year say that a former teacher lost his hand when a Jupiter death trap bit it off. Naruto bobbed his head as he swallowed his pudding. Sounds good. The girl looked behind her and turned back to her distractedly eating friend, swallowing pudding with intent, and whispered, "Someone from your house is looking at us." The boy rolled his eyes. "Ignore him." The girl worriedly looked back to the person, flinching when the sixth year from the other night, Petrick Nailisver, narrowed his eyes at her and snarled. She shifted closer to Naruto and ducked her head to hide. Naruto gulped down another sweat spoonful and looked at her with a raised eyebrow. Her brown eyes were frantically wide. "I don't want to get you in trouble." "You won't," he assured her. He wanted to keep on slurping his pudding, but when he felt a shaking Tonks push closer to him, he closed his eyes and sighed. "He's just looking for trouble, don't worry about it." He picked up a small tray of toast and scrambled eggs and placed it in front of her, pouring her a steaming cup of lemon tea as well. "You should eat something." Tonks looked at Naruto, her small right hand squeezing his left knee, and the redhead smiled warmly at her and patted the back of her hand. It was a forced gesture on his part, one she, for the first time, easily caught on to, but one she still appreciated. Her lips twitched up and she nodded her thanks, digging into her breakfast of tea and toast. There were hurried fluttering echoing in the hall and owls swept in, dropping letters and packages sent by parents to their wards. A long, wrapped package that was clearly a broomstick dropped down on a first-year Hufflepuff's lap, and the pink-haired girl turned to her friend with a question. "Are you going to try out for Quidditch?" Naruto shook his head. "No, I'd rather stay on the ground than fly around at high speed, chasing and dodging balls simply to get points." Tonks chuckled and jabbed his ribs. "Afraid of heights?" The boy shot a sarcastic eye roll at her and returned to his delicious pudding. "It's better than falling on my face after seeing a broom. You know, I regret telling you that." The boy smiled, scraped the last of his pudding, cleaned his lips with the corner of his robe and smiled sweetly at the girl. "And I will never let you forget it." It became a sort of tradition for them. Naruto would always come to the Hufflepuff table to eat, and they would leave the hall together for their classes. Tonks never always went to the Slytherin table to eat during their first year. She knew it was that there were people in his house that hated how he associated with her, especially because of her half-blood status, and Naruto wanted her to stay away from them. The Hufflepuff table were still unsure of how to take the fact that a Slytherin constantly ate at their table, but they chose to remain passive until Naruto became hostile. So far, the older Slytherin only conveyed their disdain for the pair through hateful glares and small hexes thrown at the redhead. It was when Naruto had charms with Ravenclaw and Tonks had transfiguration with Gryffindor, 4 months into their first year, did the older snakes stop hiding their spite at the two first years' friendship. Naruto was about to separate from his still only friend, with him going straight down a hallway and Tonks having to go up several stairs for her class, until 6-7 years and the single 6th year, Petrick, surrounded them. Naruto instinctively pushed the girl behind him and his left hand reached to his back, grasping the underside of his backpack where his Kitsune Core wand was holstered. The boy couldn't help the snarky remark that came out of his lips. "This took longer than I thought." He was fairly sure that it was these group of senior students that were threatening other Slytherin, and other houses, from interacting with the two. Hell, Naruto barely saw his roommate, and even if he did, the boy was either rushing out of the room to go to the library or for class, or he was asleep, in his clothes. Sometimes Naruto felt like the boy overworked himself. He shook his head to bring his mind back to the current situation. Tonks too was having trouble making friends from her house, and it pained Naruto that he couldn't do much about it. He couldn't simply force a person to be friends with her, she would know somehow. The boy's eyebrows rose up a fraction, using his right hand to keep the girl behind him. "I was expecting an ambush like this since December." The pink-haired girl peered over his shoulder and grasped the arm keeping her back with both of hers, gently pulling him back. "Naruto, please don't. I thought I told you to stay away from that Hufflepuff. And I thought Slytherin hated Gryffindor." A 7th-year girl with stark white hair and blood-red eyes sniffed, her right hand in her left sleeve, grasping her wand. "We believe in purity and royalty. Your association with this Hufflepuff is tainting our house." "I'm sure that's what you were taught to believe. As for me, I was raised differently." The girl began shaking when the 4 of the 7 years removed their wands, keeping them pointed down but in tight hands. She squeezed the redhead's arm again and pulled him towards the stairs. "Naruto, don't." The first-year Slytherin allowed her to drag him back, not letting his guard down for even a second. A white-haired boy with red eyes, like the girl, laughed boisterously and said, "Oh, that's right, you're a nameless bastard. That deserves a killing curse." Naruto's jaw tightened and he put up some resistance to Tonks as she took careful steps up the stairs, walking backwards and pulling her friend along. The 6th-year leader cackled and pointed at Naruto. He doesn't know who his father or his mother is, that's undoubtedly why he doesn't have a surname. He's probably too dumb to even pick a surname, a different 7th-year remarked with a sly smirk. Don't listen to them, Naruto. A worthless bastard that was most likely thrown out of his house. Petrick chortled. How did you even get sorted into Slytherin? This time Tonks had to slid around her friend and stand in front of him, her large, soft brown eyes pleading for him to not listen to them as she pushed him up the stairs with both of her hands, using all of her might to drive Naruto backwards up the stairs as he silently glared death at the seniors. That's right, hide behind your girlfriend, bastard. She's a half-blood, but she's a lot purer than you'll ever be. Naruto's hand clenched around his dark wand at what Petrick said. It's such a shame her pure-blood mother married that filthy muggleborn. She would have made a much better Slytherin than you if she wasn't so inept. Naruto tried to fight down the snarl that crawled onto his pale face. A bastard and a clumsy half-born, a suitable pair. Naruto found his arm outstretched over Tonks' left shoulder before she knew it. Flipendo duo. The jinx whizzed out of his wand and slammed into the 6th-year's chest, bashing him into 2 of the 7 years behind him and still having enough force to skid them roughly 20 yards back. Their wands dropped in their surprise. The redhead wasted no time shooting another spell. Incarcerus. Golden ropes popped out of thin air and wrapped 2 more 7 years, and the 1st year blasted a disarming spell on only one 7th year, ending his stream of spells by jabbing his coal-black wand at the last 7th year. Epoxymize. The senior student's wand glued into her hand, and when she tried shouting a jinx at Naruto she found out, after the resulting blast of thick black smoke from the tip of her wand, that it was fairly impossible to cast a spell with her wand magically glued to her hand. The white-haired, red-eyed female twin gaped at Naruto as he grabbed hold of his shocked silent friend by her shoulder with his right hand and waved his wand above his head. An ear-piercing wail screeched from his wand, and no doubt the teachers would be at their exact location in a minute, leaving her to take the fall seeing as she was the last one standing with a wand in her hand. No sane teacher would believe a 1st year could cast all those spells perfectly and in quick succession. Truth was, when the senior told them it was the 1st year Naruto that had cast the spell, some, Snape and McGonagall, instantly believed it, though hiding this admission of belief under a week-long detention for all the Slytherin involved. The redhead grinned at her and tapped the red tip of his black wand on the top of Tonks' head, then on his forehead. The 1st years shimmered out of sight as the disillusionment charm set over them, making them blend seamlessly into the stairs and wall. Professor Flitwick and Professor Sprout were the first at the location the alarm had wailed. The others followed closely behind. As the 2 friends ran away undetected, they didn't stop running until Naruto ushered the girl into the library, where he took off the disillusionment charm. Tonks looked like she both angry and mystified at the same time. Her mouth opened but only low, incoherent words flooded out, following Naruto as he sat down in a huff on a chair. The redhead patiently waited until she was finished admonishing him with barely decipherable words, flapping her arms wildly but still having the presence of mind to keep her voice down. I can't believe you. I begged you to stay cool, but you didn't listen to me. They were baiting you to attack so they could attack back as self-defense. It's common sense. A few more arguments rushed out of her words and splashed onto Naruto's face, until the girl crumpled onto a chair and placed her hands onto her face, moaning sadly. Now we're going to get in trouble and we're going to get kicked out, and we'll have to beg people for money. Naruto chose to interrupt before she began conjuring warped ideas of what would happen if they dropped out of school. We won't get kicked out. They won't even believe we did anything. The girl opened her fingers slightly and glared at her friend. And why do you think so? Those were advanced spells, only 2nd years are supposed to know them. He realized he had just buried himself as soon as he finished speaking. The girl shot to her feet and flapped her hands over her head again. 2nd year spells? Then how the heck does a 1st year know them? I'm an advanced reader, you know that. Naruto sharply replied. It wasn't a complete lie, and it seemed to placate the girl for that moment, seeing as she knew long ago that Naruto was smarter than he made himself to be. Advanced reader or not, it doesn't excuse you for not listening to me. She steadily sat back down into a chair across from the redhead, shifting it close so that her knees were pressed against Naruto's. The mafia boss eyebrows slowly lowered at her mood drop. He sat up and quietly paid attention to what she was going to say. I know how bullies act. I've had my own fair share of bullies when I was younger. They like picking on people they think are beneath them, but they won't as long as you lay low. Dora, they don't want us to be friends. Her lips sealed shut, and she tiredly shrugged. Her eyes looked down. The mafia boss slowed down, and his eyebrows furrowed, leaning his head to look past the girl's hanging bangs and into her soft brown eyes. Do you still want us to be friends, Dora? She peeked at him and lightly slapped his knee. Of course I still want us to be friends. Forever. Naruto smiled and nudged her knee with his. Forever. He grabbed her hands with both of his and got up, helping her up as well. He picked up her bag and slung it over his shoulder, carrying his in his left hand. We're probably already late for class. Might as well skip it and go to the lake. The girl placed her fists on her hips and followed behind her friend as he started walking to the door. You're not a good influence on me. Naruto turned around and walked backwards, baring his sharp teeth and wide grin. I try my best. That night, lay awake in his bed, trying to fully understand the promise he made to his first and only friend. Forever. I can't do forever, he whispered, his mood declining as his eyes drooped. I'm a Yakuza, I can't say I'll live forever. He turned onto his side and looked at the vague outline of his roommate. The poor boy had night terrors. It kept Perry Bones and Naruto from having a good night's sleep. It always happened at 2:45 a.m. in the morning, and Naruto usually set an alarm to wake up at that time to tranquilize the boy back to sleep, but his mind was too clouded with his promise. Promise. He broke the first promise he ever made, and now he was going to break his second. Promise me you won't get these tattoos. His uncle's last words to him echoed in his mind, polluting his brain with the guilt he had been suffering for 6 long, painful years. He avenged the House Sarutobi by ending the Otsutsuki lineage through killing Kagaya, but that only wiped off a small smudge, leaving a massive hole in his soul, the part of him that constantly punished him for breaking the promise. Promise me you won't get these tattoos. I got the tattoos, Uncle Asuma. He curled up into a ball under his thick blanket and bit bottom lip when a traitorous whimper threatened to slip out. I am sorry. He only made 2 promises in his life and had broken his first. His second was being broken right before his cracked, teary eyes. I am so sorry, Dora. The most he could do was stay away from fights, but what kind of a leader would he be if he didn't attend major battles? Better wizards would come, they always did. Like he did with Kagaya and her inner circle. His tattoos were his shame. They symbolized his complete, unquestioned control over all of the Yakuza and all of Japan. People from their home that simply saw the tattoos on his arms knew who he was. He couldn't even enchant it to be unseen because there were counter charms in the ink. He could never get them off, and he could not hide it behind an illusion, only by wearing a long sleeve. If Tonks somehow found a way to see his tattoos, even if she might not know the significance or the symbolism, it would crush the boy. Her parents had heard of the House Namikaze. They should also know the organization that house was affiliated with. The Sarutobis were killed because of a similar set of tattoos, Asumas. The Namikaze, a house of people that all had the gang tattoos, were wiped out by a raid of upstarts from the ministry. The Uzumaki were killed by a person that had the tattoos, Kagaya. The Otsutsuki were ended by a boy that had been forced to wear the body art. They were his shame. They were proof of the death of his parents, the death of his family, and the death of his innocence. He wrapped his arms around his legs and pushed his forehead into his knees, allowing his body to punish him for breaking another promise. He wanted so much to be a good friend to Dora, to live up to his promise of being her friend forever, but his life in the dark kept him back. At the very same time, he couldn't bear the thought of leaving her alone. She made him happy, really, really happy, for the first time since he sat by the fireplace with his Aunt Akuma listening to her read him a story. If she saw his shame, if she saw his tattoos. Even though she might not know the meaning. He didn't know what he would do. Perry Bones, his roommate, began thrashing about on his bed, and Naruto looked over his knee, his purple eyes twinkling in the dark, listening to the boy scream and grunt as the night terrors fully took a hold of him. Naruto reached out under his pillow and retrieved his mother's Velacor wand. Still lying on his side, he pointed it at the screaming boy, and soft, white wind floated out from the tip. Nocta Sempra. Always be in the dark, always sleep. A spell that would only lift at the crack of dawn. On reaching the boy, the wind wrapped around Perry's head. The sounds of Yuzushio's sirens sang gentle, soothing songs and lulling him back to sleep. The boy suddenly felt tired and his wand hand dropped, accidentally letting go of his mother's wand as his hand hung off the edge of his bed. The Velacor wand rolled under Naruto's bed and hummed out a different song to its master, pulsing with soothing, gentle white energy. There was a brief, almost imperceptible stutter in its song as the Cubicor wand rolled out from the darker recesses of under the boy's bed like a tiger that had been hiding for hours, patiently waiting for its prey, buzzing lowly with red-tinged energy covering it. The Velacor, still singing, moved back once as the kitsune core increased the dark influence under the bed and rolled closer. There was a whimper from the Vila core wand, and the dominant QB core wand seemed to take this as an acknowledging defeat, rolling back a little to allow the dead mother's wand to sing her beloved son to sleep, all the while keeping a careful eye on it, guarding its master viciously. The two sentient wands, extensions of their former owners, only wanted their master to find peace. Peace that always eluded him. Naruto's eyelids felt heavy, vaguely feeling the one-sided tussle for dominance beneath him, but too tired to think too deeply into it. He didn't fight to stay awake, allowing the Otsutsuki wand to lull him to sleep, where he dreamt of the second part of his one-man invasion of the Ministry of Magic. He slid to a stop at the top of the stairs and slinked behind a wall. Behind it was a long, marble corridor with offices lining the sides, splitting into two other corridors and ending up with another flight of stairs going further up to the more important offices. Naruto swallowed and steeled his nerves, gripping the training wand with both hands and holding it up to his chest, under his chin. He briefly looked over his shoulder, around the wall, peeking out a single eye, and hurried back before eyes could meet him. He counted 15. He didn't see the 5 main players he was meant to kill before Kaguya. He suspected they were with their boss in her office to serve as personal guards. He grit his teeth and clenched his wand tighter, pressing the tip under his chin slightly and saying, "I don't have to kill you guys, but I will if you stand in my way." The Yakuza members waiting for his arrival immediately went on guard as they heard his voice, rushing into the 2 split-off corridors in standard defensive positions. 5 remained in place at the middle corridor, hiding behind 2 large, hazy silver shields. Fu Yamanaka gasped in surprise, his teal-green eyes sharply staring at where the voice had come from. "Naruto? What the hell, man?" Naruto's purple eyes slowly leaked red and they shrank into tiny dot, releasing his right hand from his training wand and using his left hand to point it down. His back was still pressed against the wall, and his left leg was bent, ready to make a run for it into the corridor. "Last chance to drop your wands and leave this building." The redhead barked, his eyes narrowed. It was Doton, uncle to the mayor of Spring City, that answered. "Come on, Naruto, you know we can't do that." "I'm going to enjoy this," the boy mumbled. Naruto twirled his wand in his hand and stepped out from behind the wall, his eyes lowered to the ground and a small, childish frown on his face. His eyes snapped to the left, glaring straight at them with demonic red eyes, and he twirled his training wand once more again. Those that knew him knew that he already had at least 7 spells to cast that would kill 9 of them. The curses started flying, knowing better than allow the boy any chance to move. The boy bent his torso to the ground in a crouch, his wand clenched between his teeth, and he bolted to them in a gust of soft wind. He spun aside from a whirring green curse, leaped to his right from a sizzling red hex and ran up the wall in 3 steps. He flipped forward with a backflip and soared over the heads of the 5 standing in the center of the corridor. He huffed as he landed behind them, his palms landing on the ground as his feet skidded back on the smooth marble floor, and his red eyes pulsed dangerously, thin veins bulging from the corners, and he clapped his hand, flashing through 3 hand seals, grunting through his teeth. Blister Twister. The astounded Yakuza members, surprised that the child had dodged over 30 curses and hexes and somehow found a way behind their defense, ground their teeth as Naruto got to his feet and pointed to his sides, into the 2 split-off corridors, with his pointer and middle finger in handguns. Blistering hot wind blew from the tips of his fingers, and for those that were not quick enough to erect solid iron shields were scorched, their skin turning an ugly shade of pink, and their hearts exploded in their chests. 4 died, 1 was fatally injured. "Reducto!" one of the Yakuza in the center of the corridor yelled, blasting the spell at the boy. Naruto cancelled his wandless spelljutsu and spat out his wand into his right hand, swiping it upwards and raising a silver shield. The spell harmlessly bounced off and Naruto jabbed the shield, sending it to the 5 and rolling back from 2 curses shooting at him from both sides. The shield was disabled, but the person that did it was immediately wrapped up in silver chains and dragged towards the red head. Naruto levitated him up and used the man as a club to swat away hexes fired at him, which inevitably killed him. Then he transfigured his dead body into an arrow and blasted it at a random direction. The transfigured arrow bounced off the ground, pinged off the wall, clinked against the other wall, before it buried itself into the neck of a witch, who gasped in horror and thus fumbled her next spell. BM. Aqua Erecto. A jet of clear water blasted from the tip of his wand and cut through the chest of a dazed wizard. The boy continued as he stopped the charm. Ventus. Wind spiraled out from his wand and slammed against the wizard, propelling him straight into the ground and cracking the back of his head open. Naruto dropped onto his knee as a jinx whizzed over his head, spinning on his knee to his side and pointing his wand at the caster. Aqua Erecto. Ibublio. Fu Yamanaka felt air well up in his body and he began to swell, bigger and bigger, before he exploded into hundreds of bubbles. The boy winced as he was sprayed with bright green eyes. He swiped his wand at the direction of the wizard and coughed. Confringo. Thum! Fire exploded beside Torian Aburaim, and it took out his whole left leg and burned half of his body, but his distraction was worth it. Blood sprayed out of Naruto's mouth as a witch bolted to his side and slugged him across the face with a destructive fist. The boy careened from the blow and slid across the ground, righting himself in time to avoid a conjured metal bludgeon from cracking against his legs. The redhead lifted his right shin to block a kick to his side, but his feet still shifted back on the marble floor. Two more wizards joined the fighting witch and Naruto cursed, hopping over a sweep and catching a fist to his chest, wrapped his leg around the appendage and jolted his head forward, propelling the fist to crack against the wall. He released the arm and moved his head aside when a roundhouse kick swept to his face, kicking out the feet of the screaming wizard and ramming his knee into his stomach. The man lurched forward after the brutal attack and his face met the foot of the next roundhouse kick with enough strength to bounce his brain in his head and fracture the attacker's toes. The last person gave a battle cry and bolted to Naruto. His wand, and the wand of the other wizards left, were broken from the fire explosion Naruto had last used, leaving them with only hand-to-hand. As he neared Naruto, the boy already had his wand in his hand. Avada Kedavra. The man's eyes dimmed with death as the curse hit him in the chest, and the speed he was traveling in only made him crash his body against the wall behind Naruto as the boy stepped aside, watching as the man flopped onto the ground lifelessly. Green light flashed 4 more times as the fleeing wizards realized that they stood no chance against the child, even if he was using a training wand. Naruto spat out blood onto the ground and he wiped the corner of his lips with his wrist. He fought to control his breathing as he began walking to the end of the hallway to the stairs, leaving behind the 15 bodies littered in the corridor. The veins at the corner of his eyes throbbed once as his eyes remained in their red dot form. Naruto's eyes snapped after his Velacor wand rattled once under his pillow. He grumbled sleepily and reached under, tapping the wand with his finger to silence the vibrating alarm. He sat up on his bed and yawned widely, throwing his hands over his mouth to stifle the sound and closing his eyes as he stretched his arms over his head. He rubbed his hands down his face and shook his head twice to get the sleep out. He mumbled tiredly and got off the deceptively soft bed, casting an eye across the room and catching the eye of his ginger-haired roommate. The boy smiled slightly at him as he rubbed water out of his hair with a white towel. Naruto nodded back a silent greeting and turned around to give the boy his privacy, while he pulled out his trunk from under his bed and threw it open, tossing a freshly laundered robe onto his bed, a long-sleeved white dress shirt, formal black pants and a green and silver tie. It was only on weekends that they were allowed to wear less formal clothing under their robes. He rummaged under his bed again and retrieved a pair of polished black shoes. He carefully set his clothes on his bed and placed his side bag next to them, before he brought out a white towel from his trunk, a bar of soap and a yellow sponge. He used his foot to shove his trunk back under the bed, smacking his lips as the last vestiges of sleep left him. The redhead looked down to his pajamas, a simple short-sleeved red shirt with a black long-sleeved underneath and black boxer shorts with black socks on his feet. He didn't really have any pajamas, rather he had clothes he wore to bed. He kicked off his socks and tossed them to the end of his bed where he would find them later to take to the laundry. Instead of walking to the door leading out of his room, he moved to the wall opposite the door where the Slytherin banner was hung on the wall, but stopped when he heard the bed springs of Perry's bed depress as the boy sat down on it with a huff. "Will you take long?" Perry asked. Naruto turned to him slightly and the boy tilted his chin up, a proud look he had learned from his Aunt Amelia Bones. The boys nearly always left for the day together, but Perry had said that he only did this so he could mooch off Naruto's smarts as much as possible before his friend, Tonks, took him away. The redhead didn't mind much, especially since he knew that the boy spent most of his time in the library, or sleeping or eating. Making friends and hanging out was not in Perry's itinerary. 5 minutes was Naruto's answer, and he walked through the unseen passageway behind the Slytherin banner that led into the passageway going to the first-year boys' shower room. Meanwhile, under Naruto's pillow, the Velacor wand warily stared at the Kitsune Core wand, the latter keeping an eye on her like it had been doing for the past 4 months since Naruto had gotten it. "I only want Master to be happy." No matter how many times the Vela whispered her oath, her promise to her master, the Kitsune wand still didn't believe her. "Yeah, right. You only want to steal the silver coin when Master finds it. I'm watching you, Vela." It was times like this that the Velacor hated being made from a strand of Kagaya's hair. Chapter 4. The first Yule for 2 first years. Tonks peeked outside the large front doors of the castle and shivered, rubbing her gloved hands together. Her soft brown eyes stared enviously at the older students that steadily made their way to Hogsmeade. She yelped when a firm hand clamped onto her shoulder, spinning around when she felt the familiar strength resonating from that single limb. Naruto looked at her with a simple, one-word question in his eyes and she said, casting another jealous look to the people trooping into the village. I want to go. Naruto shook his head in exasperation, making the girl pout cutely. The redhead chuckled and patted her head, pulling her woolly hat down to cover her ears, reflexively making sure his only friend didn't catch a cold. They probably just want to go and make out in the pub. He blew into his hands and rubbed them together. The girl was swaddled in a thick winter robe, warm regular clothing underneath, a pair of thick boots and gloves, while Naruto was in a green long-sleeved sweater and black pants with normal black shoes. Over it all he wore his house cloak. He shuffled away from the door as a particularly cold gust of wind blew in, moving away from it, and wedging himself into the small gap between the open right door and the wall. Tonks swiftly went with him to the gap and pushed herself into Naruto, bumping her forehead into his chin. Who says I don't want to make out in a pub? Naruto rolled his eyes, quickly getting used to how close Tonks insisted they be. Do you even know what making out means, Dora? The cute girl shrugged and Naruto laughed. His breath washed over her face and she smiled as she inhaled it. His breath smelt of a fireplace, burning merrily and invitingly. It means when two, or more, he added in his mind. People kiss. Lip to lip. Tongue to tongue. Spit to spit. The more details he added, the wider his grin stretched, and the more his voice became amused, most especially when his friend leaped away from him. Tonks reared back and stuck out her tongue. EW. Naruto laughed louder, his pale cheeks reddening with warmth as he did so. A light bulb went off over her head and she slithered close to her friend, just almost falling over onto her face if Naruto had not caught her by her upper arms. She puckered her lips and Naruto's neck leaned all the way back, avoiding her. What are you doing? I want to try that kissing thing. Naruto shoved her back and wagged his finger in front of her face, even as she hopped excitedly on her feet. No, Dora. No kissing. She leaped at him and the mafia boss smoothly slid under her and took a step back. Ah, come on, Naruto. How about one kiss? Just one. I'm fine, thank you. Naruto replied with a raised eyebrow, slowly taking steps backwards as Tonks steadily approached him, a devilish grin on her face and her eyes twinkling with mischief. She lunged at him with her arms outstretched, and the redhead again dodged her. He saw eagerness and playfulness meshed together in her face. She truly wanted to kiss him, but she also enjoyed seeing the Slytherin squirm at her advances. Her predatory approach to getting a kiss was getting her mind off Hogsmeade. The boy hid his smirk behind a wide-eyed, frantic expression, holding out his hands to her and making placating motions for her to calm down. Now listen, Dora, and he turned around and fled for dear life. Tonks rolled up her sleeves and screamed out a war cry as she followed him, her lips leading the way. Just one kiss. Playful sniping. When the two friends had separate classes that took up most of the time, they only ever saw each other as they passed through the main hallway on the way to their next class. Nearly always they walked in a gaggle of first years in their house, not close enough to many to be called friends, but the other first years were close acquaintances. These group of first years, one being Hufflepuff and Slytherin, would sometimes purposely slow down when both friends met in the hallway, eavesdropping on the passing observations they would send each other, decelerating their quick trot to their next class only to shoot words that most found both funny and endearing. Today it was Tonks that started. The crowd of Slytherin and Hufflepuff parted to show the smart redhead in his disheveled state. His potions partner had been especially inept in doing anything. The girl smirked saucily and said, "Well, you look like a hot mess." Naruto briefly looked down at his Slytherin robe and scoffed, skimming his eyes over his friend's water-drenched form, dripping water after with each step. She was squeezing water out of her clothes while a Hufflepuff first year helped blow her dry with hot air from her wand. "And you look like a troll just gave birth to you." Tonks would always laugh and Naruto would always smile, and they would exchange a friendly fist bump, adjust the books in their arms and walk off. Break by the lake. The Namikaze's descendant drew his hand back and cast a smooth stone onto the lake, watching as it skipped 3 times before a mermaid grabbed it and pulled it underwater. He hummed when he heard his name being called, looking from the corner of his eyes as Tonks skipped a stone twice on the icy cold lake. She stood 3 feet away from him. "Hey, Naruto?" This time he took a few small steps back, avoiding the small stack of books on the ground behind him. 2 first-year Transfiguration textbooks, 3 rolled up, heavily stained parchments, an ink pot and 2 quills. He rushed forward and flung his stone, only making it to the 4th hop on the water before a mermaid caught it. "How are you so smart?" Tonks threw her stone and huffed as it only skipped twice again. Naruto placed his hands on his hips and pursed his lips in thought. What do you mean, Dora? She looked at him with a bland expression. I mean, how are you so smart? She puffed out a breath as she hurled another stone. It's not natural. The redhead scoffed and pointlessly juggled 2 stones in his hands. You're unnatural. Don't change the subject, she hissed with narrowed eyes, crossing her arms tightly. Naruto shrugged weakly and turned around, looking at the other free students scattered around the lake and before the forest, but at a safe distance. I enjoy reading. The girl shook her head strongly. I've only known you for 4 months and I already know when you're lying. A twisted smirk crawled onto the boy's face. Do you now? She glared at him fiercely, again catching him as he tried to rile her up so that she could forget about her question. It was a trick he commonly used on her when he didn't want to answer a question concerning his past. Naruto. The redhead threw his hands up in resignation and said, Okay, fine, my foster mother made me read a lot of books when I was younger. She looked at him, patiently waiting for him to continue. What more do you want from me? She didn't reply, simply trudging up to him, narrowing her light brown eyes as she stared up into his bright purple eyes. Then she beamed at him and grabbed his right hand with both of hers, dragging him down to the ground beside her. She moved closer to him on her knees and opened her textbook, retrieved her wand from the ground, lying beside Naruto's Kitsune Core wand, and jabbed the first chapter, Gamp's Laws of Transfiguration, looking at her friend with a hesitant, uncertain smile. Can you teach me this? Professor McGonagall might quiz us about them in her next class. Naruto blinked at her once, then a friendly smile bloomed on his face. Of course, Dora. Herbology. The Peruvian sea grape is a vital ingredient in the water-purifying potion, of which you will learn in your 2nd year. Professor Pomona Sprout, the teacher of the herbology class, said as she tapped the large transparent cylinder behind her with 4 inches of soil at the bottom and filled almost to the brim with water. The tap made the floating green and yellow bulbs, as small as a human eye, shiver and retract back into the ground, changing their color to that of the soil when the soil didn't fully cover them. The students listening to her began scribbling down notes. At the back of the class, a red-haired boy and a bubblegum-haired girl were doing the same, or rather the boy was jotting down points and the girl was insistently jabbing her elbow into his side, calling for his attention. Naruto, have you ever wondered why people think the dad teaching position is cursed? The boy kept on writing as he mumbled. No, not really. Tonks continued as if she had not heard him. I heard from a few seniors that a former student applied for the job, but Dumbledore rejected his application and the student jinxed the position. Fascinating, was Naruto's highly sarcastic reply. I know, right? She said in an almost high-pitched, squeaky voice, coughing into her fist when the teacher stopped to look at her. Then she slowly went back to her topic. Tonks jabbed Naruto's ribs with her pointy elbow, and the boy muffled his tired groan into a flare of his nostrils. Yes? Why do you think the headmaster would reject his application? Don't know, don't care. I think it's because Dumbledore didn't trust him, she again said like he was actively participating in the conversation. Is that so? Naruto mechanically muttered. Spooky, right? I've got chills. What kind of jinx do you think the guy used? It has to be a really strong one if it's able to affect an entire teaching position for who knows how long. This time Naruto remained silent, trying his best to look like a serious student, even as some of his housemates goofed off around by poking potted plants and gossiping in small groups. The Hufflepuff were a bit better, taking up most of the space directly in front of the woman. Only a few looked like they were sleeping on their feet. There was a gaggle of gossiping girls to Naruto's left, and they were sending quick looks to the pale redhead, whispering a tittering into their hands with flushed smiles. The girls standing beside Naruto, Tonks, sent a glare over to them when one of the girls, a black-haired beauty with tan skin and dark brown eyes, hesitantly smiled welcomingly to Naruto, non-verbally inviting him to come closer. The boy, who at that time sighed and looked to the girls to see what all the fuss was about, furrowed his eyebrows in confusion, but still sent back a small smile and a nod, returning back to his notes. Tonks ground her teeth and drove her elbow deep into her friend's side. Naruto. Naruto sighed and his arms dropped to his side with his jotter in his left hand and his pencil in his right. He looked over at his friend with a slight frown. Yes, Dora? The girl shot another glare to the Slytherin girls beside Naruto, frowning deeper and deeper at how brave they gradually became, from sending encouraging smiles and giggling amongst themselves to shuffling closer to the unmindful boy. She clenched her fists and reined in the unknown storm of emotions spiraling in her chest and sending terrible, burning sensation through her heart. She shakily smiled at Naruto and asked, Can we switch places? Naruto looked at her incredulously and shrugged limply. Sure, okay. Great, she said with a wide grin and swept in front of him to his other side. Naruto moved to where she stood and looked up to the teacher at the front of the class, guessing where she was and continuing his jotting from there. While he was busy being a student, Tonks smiled victoriously to the group of glowering Slytherin girls. Unwanted popularity. Naruto didn't consider himself a good-looking boy. He would admit that he saw himself more as a cute little boy, but this was only when he wanted to manipulate an adult. Adults not in his gang nearly always saw him as adorable. Hell, the first time he went shopping in Diagon Alley with Conan and Kakuzu by his side, he lost count of how many times grown women stopped to pinch his cheeks and grown men pat his shoulder, telling him that he was going somewhere. The attention was fine, and only because it was from the adult populace. Adults could do anything you wanted them to do as long as you were persuasive, and one of the ways Naruto could be persuasive was by enlarging his iris, making them twinkle with stars and giving a small, innocent smile. Here in Hogwarts, roughly 4 or 5 months into the session, he had gathered a sort of reputation. He was first made aware of it during a history class with the Ravenclaw first years. The boy sitting by his right side, his roommate, Perry Bones, intercepted a small note that was to be sent to the Ravenclaw girl sitting 2 seats to Naruto's left, read it, directed Naruto an amused shake of his head, and gave it to the bored redhead to read. Oh my gosh, he looks so good today. Naruto has the best eyes. The boy scoffed, thinking nothing of the note, and passed it over to the red-faced Ravenclaw. After class, the boy was making his way through the halls to his dorm, where he forgot to take his potions textbook for class, which was going to be in 30 minutes. This time he came upon a small crowd of Gryffindor girls, first and second years, tittering with their faces heavily flushed when Naruto rounded the third to the last corner before he got to the Slytherin dungeon. He disregarded them for a moment, only suspiciously walking on as they laughed and looked at him as he passed. The Gryffindors parted for him, and just as Naruto was about to pass the last girl, he heard, "He is such a rebel." Naruto had to fight the impulse to turn around. He had a textbook to get and a class to attend, much more important things to deal with than trying to decipher the complexities of a girl's mind and why exactly he was a rebel. As he hiked his side bag up his shoulder before it could slip off and turning around a corner to a flight of stairs going down, he heard another girl reply, "Ugh, he so is, and his eyes are to die for." There were small gasps from the other and a quick chatter of agreement. The sound of giggling accompanied him down into the dungeons. He shook his head in exasperation and discarded it all from his mind. Their opinion of him might change as soon as they saw his shark-like teeth. But apparently people, especially the younger students from first to third years, found Naruto's defiance to his seniors extremely admirable. Slytherin versus Hufflepuff. The crowd of students at the stands rippled with cheers as 2 rows of 7 people flew out from the bleachers on broomsticks, separating to opposite sides of the field. One side wore green and the other yellow. Naruto winced when an ear-piercing scream-shriek sounded beside him. He shot an irritated look at the hyper-excited girl hopping on her feet next to him, clapping her hands and waving them over her head, yelling out her support for her house as well as the rest of the Hufflepuff and Gryffindor standing around them. The game started and the bubbling roars of the fans didn't subside. The redhead shot another look at his friend as she slammed into his side, threw her right arm over his shoulder, and started bouncing on her feet in tune with the other puffs. The girl sensed his discomfort and grinned at him. "Come on, Naruto, why aren't you cheering? Your house is playing." He frowned a little as he looked directly above him where the 2 seekers raced after a small blur of gold. "I don't really get the fuss about Quidditch, that's all." The girl looked at him, aghast, and looked around to make sure no one had heard him. "Any louder, and you would have been lynched." The boy shrugged uncaringly. "I'm just saying." She rolled her eyes and calmed down somewhat. "Don't they play Quidditch back in your country?" Naruto held down the sharp smirk that wanted to shoot off his face at her hesitance. He cleared his throat and furrowed his eyes, looking genuinely confused and adorable, in Tonk's opinion. "My country?" The girl choked. "Yeah, you know," she subtly motioned for him to fill her in. "Your country?" He raised his eyebrows and tilted his chin up a little. A small, unimpressed smile danced on his lips as he asked, "And what country is that?" Yes?" She blanched and weakly shrugged. "I'm sorry, Naruto." Naruto shook his head and turned back to the game. "I've told you where I'm from 5 times. I really don't know where my mind was all those times." "Konoha, Japan," he simply said and sent a forgiving smile. "Try not to forget it this time." She nodded and hooped as her house scored a goal. The scorer took a lap around the field, and over them, before he returned back to his position. She then gained a mischievous look and turned to Naruto. What about me? Went to Ford County. Her friend replied without looking at her. How about my mom? Andromeda Tonks, née Black. The girl felt her head sink lower between her shoulders as embarrassment overcame her. My dad. Ted Tonks. The girl grimaced and Naruto smirked in accomplishment, still not looking at her. Cousin. Delphine and Draco, but your parents aren't on good terms with the Malfoys, so you haven't ever met him, but he's younger than you by about 5 or 6 years. He recounted to her word for word what she told him. Her mood took a big dip. She could hardly remember anything about her friend, but he remembered every single thing she told him, down to the Malfoys' dislike for her parents. She was about to turn to leave the stands, so she could wallow in misery at how bad of a friend she was, but stopped when a gentle hand wrapped around her right wrist. She timidly looked down, allowing the person to pull her back to his side and huffing sadly at the wide, laughing smirk she knew was on the redhead's face. It's fine. But. It's fine. Her hair flushed red and she scuffed her foot on the ground. Okay. Naruto's hand dropped back to his side and he slowly lifted his fist into the air, coughed into his other hand with a light dusting of red on his cheeks, and then he lowly cheered when the Slytherin chaser passed, caught the quaffle and slammed it into one of the 3 ring-shaped goals. Hooray. Tonks covered her mouth at his stiff cheer and giggled when he looked at her from the corner of his eyes with a knowing smile. Astronomy. The red-haired shark-toothed boy squinted with his eyebrows furrowed as he peered into a golden telescope, looked down and wrote down the names of 2 stars he had spotted, and then went back to staring at the starlit night sky through his telescope. Voluminous X8X2, he muttered under his breath and wrote down the name, a meticulous description of the star and the type of the star. Then he looked at the star once more to make sure before he turned the silver dial closest to the telescope's looking hole, A/N, forgot the name, and pursed his lip as he saw another star his professor had said the class should find. Horatio Blue-Yellow, he blinked when he heard a polite cough behind him. Naruto. He turned and looked up at his tall, slimly built Professor Sinestra. The mocha-skinned professor was the source of many of the students' wet dreams. This was a given with her exotic beauty and her unknowingly seductive silver eyes. She was probably close to Flitwick's age, but she most definitely looked like she was entering her 30s. The woman smiled patronizingly down at her student, and Naruto rubbed the corner of his lips with his wrist, swallowing thickly. Yes, Professor? The teacher moved aside and gently nudged forward a little girl that was just about Tonks' height. The girl looked almost identical to the tall professor, with her smooth dark hair flowing down her head to her shoulders in curly waves and her bright silver eyes spinning up a storm. The girl had light mocha skin with a cute splash of freckles over her nose. She was also wearing the Ravenclaw uniform and hugging the small Astronomy for First Years, Part 1 textbook in her arms and hefting a small purple backpack on her back. The girl pursed her lips tightly and looked away from Naruto to the note in his right hand. The teacher urged her forward and said, "This is my niece, Valerie Estrella Fanger. I was hoping you could show her the first 3 stars I tasked the class to find and guide her through the rest. She seems to be having a bit of trouble." Naruto wanted to remind her that she was the teacher but held his tongue when he realized that it would be perceived as rude. He looked at the girl briefly, who was still studying the noted stars in his hand, 8 in total, then the woman. Sinestra saw the question he wanted to ask. "I need to retrieve something from my chamber, and seeing as you're my best student, I would appreciate it if you help put her through." Naruto couldn't help the proud upward twitch of his lips at the title. So far she, Flitwick and McGonagall had admitted it. Admittedly, he was having problems with potions, like every other student in the castle, and he wasn't too invested in defense against the dark arts because the teacher of that subject, Professor Corpus Maximilian, was an idiot. Still, the woman was buttering him up to agree to help her niece. Naruto nodded and said, "Okay. Thank you, 20 points to Slytherin." And she left the 2 students. The Ravenclaw girl finally slid her eyes up the Slytherin, and she breathed in as much courage as possible, releasing the breathe and stretching her right hand to Naruto. "Valerie." "Naruto." He shook her hand firmly and released it. "My aunt tells me how attentive you are, and not to her looks." "I've not yet reached the age of being interested in females," Naruto answered truthfully as he returned to his telescope, motioned for the girl to set her textbook down on the small table he had his books on and come closer. Valerie had a forced, easy, outgoing personality, like she was trying her best to impress the boy, but she could not fully suppress her discreet evaluation of him as she swept her eyes over him, flushing a little when she saw what the other girls saw in him, an adorable, welcomingly smiling boy. The girl smirked in interest and slipped near him, dropping her book and her bag on the table. Wonderful. She then quickly glanced at his note again and said in a low voice, I hope you don't mind me bringing you back to the first star, you're already on the last one. It won't be proper if I don't help a fellow student in need, especially when I can. The girl idly nodded and commented, You're not like other Slytherin, not the ones I've seen. Naruto peeked at her, then stared into his telescope as he pointed at the first star on the list, ignoring her statement. Read the first one. Porputentia Cosmaceos 5657. He moved aside and politely motioned for her to take the telescope, saying, Now if you want to find that star you need to find a cluster of Cosmaceos stars using the description of its location in the textbook. Learning magic from a fraud. Professor Corpus Maximilian was an idiot. That was Naruto's impression of the man. The man stood tall with golden locks, sparkling blue eyes and an ever-present cocky smirk. In their first class he had strutted into classroom and showered the students with golden lights, mesmerizing some of them, mostly muggle-born that weren't used to seeing such magic, and hypnotizing the girls with his tales of adventures. The first ever thing he told the class was that he was the one that taught Guildfrau Lockhart everything he knew. That was the first thing that shut Naruto's mind and finalized his decision that the man was a big fraud. He knew Lockhart. His gang had caught him 3 years ago when he had tried to infiltrate their base in Konoha with the intention of stealing a lock of Kagaya's hair from her bedroom pillow to sell in the black market. Lockhart didn't even make it past the front gate. If a man could proudly walk in and claim to be the person that taught that failed celebrity wizard, then he was a much bigger fraud than Naruto could give him credit, and the rubbish he taught them in the name of defense magic. It was sad. At one time the man had let loose a boggart in the class in an attempt at showing them how he tamed one in Macedonia. Many students had to be sent to the hospital wing from being traumatized. The man didn't even show up most of the time, and if he did he came several minutes late and gave a flimsy excuse that he was battling a horde of plumbundingy pixies that had infested the castle's top floor. But the boys all knew he was simply trying to flirt with Professor Sinestra, and failing miserably. His classes mainly involved him retelling stories, obviously fictitious ones, of his travels around the world with his student Lockhart. The only time so far that he had tried to teach them was a jinx that he claimed saved him from being devoured by Icelandic trolls, which was a simple foot-fastening spell that stuck the feet to the ground. Naruto finally deemed the class useless and a total waste of time when the teacher on one occasion spent the whole time flirting with students 40 years his junior, clearly leaping into a buffer he was almost certain would catch him after Sinestra had completely rebuffed his advances. It was even sadder that the adoration of the man came to a screeching halt when he started his pedophilic advances. The first-year boys and girls of all 4 houses had even started studying defensive jinxes on their own in case the man went too far. None of the first years were amused, thankfully, and his class, starting 3 months into the semester until the end, simply had to do with them faking adoration and hiding their wands under their tables. Never in Hogwarts history had a group of first years been so like-minded and mature enough to see the blaring warning signs flashing before them. Quite frankly, the mafia boss felt rather proud of them. The boy spent the class catching up on his sleep at the back of his class with his head cushioned in his arms and snoring mutely with his mouth slightly open. The Slytherin and Gryffindors around him clenched their wands in their tight hands. His fellow first-years respected him, irrespective of the houses they were in. They saw the boy as a rebel that scarcely listened to illogical demands from seniors and did not abide by the norm of his house. The students weren't aware of it at that time, but they were guarding the boss as he took his nap. In the 5th month of the semester the man preened under the faux praise and looked over the sea of his admiring fans. Then he caught sight of the soundly sleeping redhead at the back, the only student that was sleeping, seeing as the others were rigidly sitting in their seats and watching him like a hawk. The man's first mistake was trying to make a fool of the redhead. Watch me, dear students, as I do to that boy what I did to the Irish pepper plant. He waved his wand and 5 balloons filled with an array of different colors of paint flew to Naruto's sleeping form. 2 Slytherins, a boy and a girl, rose up before Naruto and pointed their wands at the balloons. Protego. A single, barely corporal shield fizzled into sight and the balloons bounced back, splashing on the surprised man's face. Naruto sputtered awake and rubbed his eyes, yawning widely. He blinked when he saw an enraged blonde man storm to him and grabbed the boy and girl under their arms. The class was roaring with laughter at the man's expense, even more so when the Slytherins stuck out their tongues. 100 points from Slytherin and detention for a month. The insolence. The redhead immediately realized what they had done for him, with the paint spattered on the teacher's robes and the triumphant smiles on their faces as they looked at Naruto. The sharp glimpse into the boy's memories also filled him in. Naruto jeered through his now normal-sized pupils and steadily got to his feet, stretching and rolling his shoulders twice. The class slowly stopped laughing and looked at the red head. The man fixed him with a glare and ordered, "And you, sleeping in class while I regale you a tale of my adventure in?" Naruto's Kitsune core wand slid into his left hand from his sleeve and he pointed it at the man. "Engorgo Scullus." The man screamed as his head inflated like a balloon till it scraped against the low-hanging iron chandelier hanging over the class. He stumbled backwards and dropped onto his back, his head too heavy to support. The sound of childish laughter was almost deafening as the Slytherin and Gryffindors cackled and chortled at him. He fumbled for his wand and countered Naruto's hex, rising up to his feet and glowering at the highly amused boy. That hex was nothing to play with. If it was not quickly countered, then it would only keep growing and growing until his neck would snap. As Maximilian staggered towards Naruto, getting about halfway to the boy, the rest of the class took this as their chance to shoot the defensive and offensive spells they had learned during their personal time. If it had been any other teacher, all of the students would have been sent home for suspension, but since Dumbledore lured the man in to expose him as a fraud, he convinced the other teachers to go easy on the young students. At the end of the day, all of them got a month's worth of detention and 200 points taken away from both houses. But they had no regrets whatsoever, because when the semester ended, Corpus Maximilian quit. Family. A number of pure-blood families had gotten wind of an extremely rich family that had purchased an old mansion and several acres of land near Wiltshire, where the Malfoys reside. They had come in their numbers to welcome the possibly influential family but had found only Conan at home, seeing as Kakuzu was working in the ministry and Sasori was in Wales breaking a curse over a small family there. The woman had been in charge of restoring and renovating the mansion to Naruto's taste, and she did just that, spending 3 weeks in the house fixing the building and rejuvenating the land, as well as employing house elves from those that had no families to take care of, courtesy of the ministry, to take care of the vast property. The head of the Rosier house, Alvarian Rosier, visited with his wife, Miranda Rosier, in the morning and met the purple-haired woman sitting before the fireplace, reading a book. Conan informed them that her nephew, Naruto, was in Hogwarts and the boys' uncles were at work. Even though she was the only one at home, she made sure to display her wealth to the Rosiers, impressing the pure-blood family with her eloquence and grace. She hid the fact that the money all came from Naruto's dead relatives. It was true, the boy had collected his inheritance from House Namikaze and House Uzumaki, seeing as he was the last in line of the former great house and a descendant of the royal family in the latter house. He was named the sole inheritor of the House Sarutobi wealth and bloodline if the old warlock's children met their end, and naturally because he was the adopted child of the only remaining Otsutsuki, he was given all of the Vila house's wealth. The visiting purebloods didn't need to know that. All Conan told them, all Naruto instructed her to tell them, was that she was simply Naruto's guardian until he was old enough to personally manage the estate and the vast wealth. The young Yakuza boss already had connections in low places and high places back in his home, but in Britain he wanted to start by befriending the most influential houses, the pureblood houses. Before the first visiting pureblood family left, they invited her to a ball the other pureblood families were having a week after Hogwarts was to go on vacation, just so that they could meet the woman's nephew. The Malfoys, Greengrasses, Patels and Crabs also came by to gauge the newly occupied, lavish mansion, finding it beneath them that the woman had no last name but finding respect in how much she commanded respect with her mere presence. No doubt she was mirroring her boss, unbeknownst to her guests. They extended their invite to her and Naruto. The boy wrote his permission for her to mingle with the families as much as she was comfortable, as long as she kept her guard up and ensured that she was not manipulated, fully believing that the wonderful actress that was also a stone-cold dark mage was ready to handle any obstacle the purebloods threw at her. He also detailed that the gate around the estate was to be well enchanted to prevent any adventurous wizard from entering. A few weeks ago, the house elves caught a man by name Mundungus Fletcher trying to steal an old, incredibly expensive map of magical Japan that used to belong to Hiruzen Sarutobi. Tonks curiously watched Naruto encase a neatly folded letter into an envelope, enchant it with a for authorized eyes only charm and strap it onto Sara's left ankle. He stroked the smart bird's head and whispered into his ear, "Give this to Conan and wait for her response." Squayak! The bird flapped his wings, accepting his master's message, and flew out of the auri. The boy ran his hands down his Slytherin cloak and regarded Tonks as she moved to his side, watching the Suna all fly away from the school. "How come you never talk about your family?" The boy turned around and walked out room, closely followed behind by the pink-haired girl. Her forehead creased in worry, wondering if she had said something wrong. "Naruto? I have a large family." "Then why don't you ever want to talk to me about them? I talk to you about my family all the time." "I never asked you to tell me about your family, Dora." The girl stopped for a brief moment, and Naruto didn't, storming down the long, winding stairs of the second tower down to the top floor of the castle. He only got down 6 steps before Tonks ran up to him and slid in front of him, shoving him back with her eyes red with anger. I told you because you're my friend. I told you because I trust you. The boy stumbled back a few steps and his eyes darkened, a small snarl crawled up his face, and the girl's rage sputtered before she forced it back on, tilting her chin up in defiance. I never asked you to trust me. The girl's fists balled tightly by her sides and she held down the urge to punch her friend, channeling all her bubbling anger into shoving him back again, forcing him up a few more stairs. Well, I do. Naruto's snarl became more pronounced and his purple eyes turned red, squeezing into a vague vulpine shape. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what trust is. The girl found the enraged, evil eyes affected her in the opposite way Naruto intended for it to. It made her mad, it made her furious, it set her heart on fire and she punctuated each word with a brave, strong shove from her thin arms against the boy's chest. Then. Tell. Me. Naruto staggered back with each push, his eyes becoming wide and his shark-like teeth elongating out of his mouth as he bared them at her. The girl went up to him and poked his chest, looking up into his deranged eyes with strong brown eyes, not wavering even the slightest, which was remarkable for an 11-year-old. Talk to me, Naruto. I don't have to. No, you don't have to, but you can. Her lips trembled, and she poked his chest again, saying, You should. Naruto stole a look around him. The night sky was speckled with stars and the only occupants of the auri behind him were the eagerly listening owls. He closed his eyes and breathed out. His breath washed over her face and the familiar, longing smell of a warm furnace calmed her down. She too closed her eyes and, forgetting how close to her friend she was standing, leaned her head forward, sighing when she felt her friend's soft clothes, savoring the soothing smell of lavender and his peculiar fireplace scent. He was stressed. A few minutes ago Dumbledore sent him a letter to report to his office at the end of the semester to talk about his parents and his grandfather. Orochimaru sent him a letter, confessing to him that he had fitted his mother twice, one time when she was younger but her wand melted when the core couldn't take her magical strength anymore, and the second time was with a core made out her own hair, meaning Naruto had been lugging around a piece of his mother for the past year, and he didn't know. Conan informed him about the increasing attention the purebloods were giving him, inviting Naruto to parties they were organizing. They both knew that these purebloods only wanted to see how much money they could siphon from him, probably by having their daughters marry him. Nagato reported that there was nothing to note of back in Japan, but he knew better. His age was always a recurring problem they didn't mention. And last was his goblin accountant had been sifting through the Sarutobi and Uzumaki inheritance, and noted that 5 magical texts, 7 historical scrolls, 15 priceless artifacts and an enchanted cauldron were missing from the Sarutobi, which was strange because they had all been stated in the Sarutobi's will and testament, and a single unknown artifact from the Uzumaki which wouldn't have been noticed if not for it being flippantly mentioned in History of the Whirlpool, not just an island but the people too by Mito Uzumaki. Naruto appreciated the details Shifty the Goblin to in looking after his assets. These 4 problems put him on edge, especially the fact that Kaguya probably used her second wand, his wand, as a Horcrux and the threat of an uprising in the Yakuza. I apologize, I'm just a bit worked up. The girl smiled fractionally and lifted her head so that her nose could fully immerse itself in his clothes, her eyes peacefully shut. I noticed. His hand stayed at his side. His eyebrows slowly entered his hairline when he realized she was sniffing him. He stood stock still and allowed her, staring straight behind her at the darkness of the stairs leading down, of which at the great hall the students were having dinner. He cleared his throat and the girl took a shaky, shy step back. I grew up with my grandfather and my uncle and aunt. They all died when I was 5 and I was soon adopted into a family. My foster mother died 2 years ago or so, but my extended family are still looking out for me. She looked down to his red sneakers, peeking out from the bottom of his house robe. What about your parents? Died before I knew them, the boy answered uncaringly. But if you were adopted, then why don't you have a last name? I don't want my foster mother's name. He moved past her and made to go back down the stairs again, stopping when he got to the door. I'm a very private person, Tonks. I'd been through a lot for me to start trusting people again. Her shoulders slumped, and her eyes glazed over with tears. You don't trust me, she concluded, but whipped around when she heard a stifled laugh. Her eyes roared at him when she saw his lips tightly pursed to hold in a chuckle. I don't distrust you, Dora. Hope lifted her shoulders and she raced past her friend with a large grin, grabbing his hand and dragging him along down the stairs. It's a start. Watch your snake. Hogwarts was affecting him, for good and for bad. Good as in he had somehow spread his influence and affluence among his fellow students, 1st to 3rd, probably 4th, years, and all without knowing. This gave him a large network of occasional friends and constant acquaintances that began to fearlessly approach him for help, mostly concerning their academic work, capitalizing on the red-haired Slytherin's brain, and the other times simply speak to him. But this was always when Tonks was not around and when he was hanging out by himself near the lake, his and his first friend's special haunt. The bad side was that associating with the children and constantly being ahead of his teachers tired him out. Leading the Yakuza was always going to be worse than being a student of Hogwarts. But being around the lesser experienced wizards and learning from teachers he could probably slaughter in a fair or unfair duel put a small strain on his patience. He still hadn't found the reason he agreed to school in Hogwarts. "Watcher, Snake!" Tonks yelled and pounced out from behind a tree and fell on the sleeping form of her friend Naruto in a spread-eagle belly flop. The boy yelped and caught the girl as she fell down on him, turning her over onto her back with him towering over her and pressing down her neck to the ground with his left hand and pointing his Kitsune core wand between her eyes. The hot white tip crackled with energy, ever ready to shoot a blasting hex straight into the skull of his attacker. His shark teeth were grit, and his purple eyes spun, mixing and intertwining with flecks of red and blue, before he blinked, adjusting his eyes back to normal and groaned in deep frustration when he saw that the enemy he had in his hand was his frightened, shock-silent friend, who held up both of her hands in surrender and stayed mute. The boy shakily released hold of her neck and sat back heavily on his behind, glaring hatefully at the girl with his eyes narrowed into thin slits. "Damn it, Dora, don't startle me." He stashed his wand into his sleeve and leaned back into the old tree, fighting to regain his breath. The girl unsteadily sat up, still staring wide-eyed at the sleepy redhead. "Where'd you learn to do that?" The boy simply replied. "Rough childhood." "That rough? Those were aura skills, Naruto." Her voice was fighting down the tremble that rose up her chest. She swallowed thickly and asked, "Who taught that to you?" "I taught it to myself," he quickly answered as he closed his eyes, trying to gently coax his fleeing slumber back. "What's wrong, Dora? Need help with your homework?" The girl regarded him uncertainly before she shuffled near him on her knees, pressing them into his side, but he was almost back to sleep. "Don't you have data now?" "Felt like skipping," he muttered and licked his lips and mumbled. "Haven't learned a thing from that man, stopped bothering a week ago." The girl smirked at his attitude and gently prodded his leg, careful not to startle him again. Naruto opened a single, bright purple eye and hummed for her to talk. Watching as she looked around the tree Naruto was lazing under and found that more than a few Gryffindor and Slytherin were speckled around in groups of various sizes. He smirked minutely when she turned back to him, a knowing look in her brown eyes. "Seems everyone else thinks the same thing." "Do they? I haven't noticed." "You know, if the Dumbledore or McGonagall get wind of this, you're all in hot water." She made sure to emphasize all by waving her hands around her, attracting the attention of the other truant students. His smirk went up a little to show his sharp teeth, winking at her. "They know." For a moment, quicker than a second, Tonks wanted to call out his bluff, tell him that he was full of unicorn shit, but when she looked at Naruto again and the boy subtly nodded his head to his right, laced his fingers over his belly and hummed as he closed his eyes, she looked to where he was nodding and saw Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, standing at the large front door of the castle, waving his elder wand to the crowd of mingling Gryffindor and Slytherin. Thick white scrolls floated out from a random window, one for each truant student, and in the scroll was a detailed theory on how to cast the proper shield charm, an engorgement hex, an unbreakable bubble summoning charm, and the handwritten assignment at the bottom informed them that they were to learn the theory behind the stun jinx. The man briefly watched the students roll open the scrolls and then flip open their textbooks. Some rushed immediately towards Naruto and set up camp around him, waiting patiently for the boy to wake up and help them study. Dumbledore gave them a grandfatherly smile and walked back into the castle, replaced by the tight-lipped assistant headmistress, who only showed her satisfaction at their somewhat eagerness to learn defense magic through her bespectacled eyes. She crossed her arms and supervised them from afar. Naruto hummed again. This time it sounded like a low laugh. "They know," he repeated. Tonks snatched her friend's scroll and scanned it as he sat up, stretching and yawning into the back of his right hand. She said as she looked up from the frustratingly detailed scroll. "So no detention for you guys?" The boy shook his head. "Oh no, we still get detention." He looked at her as her shoulders slumped, handing him his scroll. "Something wrong?" She puffed out a breath and looked at him with dull eyes. "How are you always so cool?" He stared back at her, mirroring her dull look. "You do remember I almost killed you, right?" "You know what I mean," she scoffed with a roll of her eyes and a playful shove. He gave her a secretive look, one between two friends that no student sitting around them could decipher, and the answer spun into her mind 2 seconds later, as he turned to Charlie Weasley and put him through the theories. Rough childhood. Favorite color? What's your favorite color? Tonks asked out of the blue, appearing behind Naruto from seemingly out of nowhere. Naruto was well past the stage of yelping at any surprise when he was wide awake, but he did wince as his ink pot tipped onto his homework. He sighed dourly and retrieved his wand from his side bag hanging on the corner of his chair, mutely sending the librarian an apology for his friend's outburst. Excuse me? What's your favorite color? She asked again, biting her lip and hopping from one foot to the other in excitement. He swept his wand over his homework, 2 parchments long and detailed enough to make Snape's brain throb. The ink vanished off his painstakingly done homework and reappeared inside the pot. He cast another look at his friend, who looked like she was going to pee on herself, and rolled his eyes. Can't you guess? She looked over him, and her excitement took a quick but brief dip when she saw he was wearing a long-sleeved black shirt with the Slytherin badge on his left chest, black pants that reached a bit over his ankles, and red sneakers. There was a green and silver scarf peeking out of his side bag. He had left his house cloak in his dorm, seeing as it was a Sunday, and he had homework to complete. She was brought out of her mind by smooth scribbling sounds coming from the Slytherin's quill. She sat down to his right and hopped closer to his side, shaking the table and making Naruto stop his writing to hold the ink pot down firmly until she stopped moving to him. Black? Naruto scoffed and said, No, magenta. Your favorite color is magenta? I'm joking, he said as he switched his quill from his right hand to his left, dipped the tip of his quill into the ink pot and gliding his hand over his homework, shooting his eyes from 3 open textbooks spread out before him and to the parchment, and then to his friend, watching him do his homework. My favorite color is vermilion. Why? His answer was her whipping out her wand from her pocket and pointing it at his shirt. Multicorphers. The tip of the wand fizzled and bright red light shot out, smashing into the boy's chest as he looked up at her, too close to dodge her spell. He toppled off his chair and onto his back, coughing and waving away the thick white smoke that covered their area of the library. Naruto glared at his friend, but the girl stared back at him with wide eyes. Her jaw dropped and all the color of her hair and skin leached off her body. Then she turned a worrying shade of red and her eyes slid up his body, meeting his enraged eyes. Her friend was lying on his back, propping himself back up with his elbows, in a puffy, bell-shaped dress. His pale shoulders were bare and a pair of glass high heels adorned his feet. The dress was also in an eye-watering shade of pink. But that was the least of Naruto's problems, realizing too late that the bottom of his dress was starched, flashing his boxers to the incredibly flustered girl. The boss rolled to his side and quickly got to his feet, unconsciously smoothing down the front of his shoulderless dress with shaky arms. Shoulderless. Oh shit. He cursed out loud, realizing another thing, possibly one of the things that made the usually outgoing pink-haired girl deathly silent. His tattoos. He grabbed his wand and ran without looking, stumbling once when his feet caught the dress under them, but regaining his footing before he could face plant into the tiled floor. He shoved aside the librarian as she went up to him, immediately assuming that he was the cause of the white smoke in the section of the library he was in. He ran his wand up his torso to his neck and his clothes reverted back to normal. The Hufflepuff stared silently as he ran away. 3 months since Naruto's miraculous display of magic against the older students, and the girl was always trying to impress him with the little she knew. The spell she had used was a 4th-year spell and she had botched the pronunciation and wand movement so much, changing Naruto's clothes into a bright pink shoulderless, Victorian-style dress instead of simply changing his black clothes to red. She wanted to show her friend that she could also read on an advanced level, that he didn't need to protect her like he did against the seniors. She wanted him to be speaking to her about advanced magic he knew, expressing himself more to her knowing that she was just as smart as him. She wanted to share a deep connection with her first friend because he took her eccentricities and her randomness patiently. Tonks knew that he was still uncomfortable with how clingy she was and she was taking steps to stop always pushing up against him, so that he could get used to her at his own pace. She didn't see her friend for the rest of the semester, not even to return his homework and his side bag. Dursley residence. The 5-year-old boy found himself, once again, making breakfast for his family when he heard a knock on the door. He winced as he pushed the spatula under the sunny side-up eggs he had on the frying pan, feeling the fresh welts on his back rub against his oversized, rough shirt. Now, whenever his Uncle Vernon felt like it, he would rip open his staircase bedroom door, drag him out, and whip him for no good reason except to vent the frustrations of that day. He flinched as he heard his uncle's voice boom from the living room, where he was gobbling up plates of buttered toast and eggs. Go get the door, runt. Harry swallowed and hopped down the wooden stool he used to reach the stove. Hobbling over to the front door, he stood up on his toes and grabbed the doorknob, turning it to the right and pulling it back. The boy's green eyes looked up at the person standing on the other side of the door. He cleared his throat and asked, "May I help you, sir?" The person standing on the other side of the door smirked widely, slightly exposing his serrated teeth. His purple eyes twinkled as he looked down at the weak child before him, the boy who lived. Naruto nodded and said, "You can help me find the silver coin, Harry." Minutes later, and Vernon Dursley roared for more eggs, supported by his pudgy son, Dudley, but Harry Potter was already gone by then. This was merely an hour after the students of Hogwarts had returned home for break. Most of the wizarding world was oblivious to this. The squib of Privet Drive gaped in horror and hastily wrote a letter to Albus Dumbledore. What if Naruto has strongest wand in Hogwarts? End here, and thanks for watching my video till the end.